You're deep in the Ural Mountains of Russia. Snow falling in slow motion, silence so thick it presses against your chest. And somewhere out there, 9 experienced hikers vanish into a nightmare that science still can't explain. This isn't some urban legend passed down through internet forums. This happened, and what was left behind still feels like something out of a dream that went wrong. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of you watch our videos, but haven't subscribed yet, so please subscribe to our channel Restwise and join our growing community. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see how connected we all are. If you enjoy relaxing with philosophy, psychology, and science while drifting into sleep, give this video a like and stay with us on the journey. Now, let's get back to the video. It started in 1959, when a group of 9 young hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on what was supposed to be an adventure. A ski trek across a frozen wilderness. These weren't amateurs. They were well-trained, disciplined, and confident enough to tackle the bitter February cold. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was known for his precision and planning. Every detail was mapped out, every checkpoint scheduled, but somewhere along their route, things began to go sideways. When the hikers failed to return on time, a search team was sent out. What they found on the slopes of what's now called Dyatlov Pass has haunted investigators, scientists, and even skeptics for over 60 years. Their tent was discovered first, slashed open from the inside. Not unzipped, not torn by wind or an animal, cut open by human hands from within, as if the people inside were desperate to escape. Their belongings, boots, coats, food, all left behind. In sub-zero temperatures, that's suicide. Yet they ran barefoot into the night. Rescue teams followed their footprints through the snow. The first bodies were found near the edge of the forest, barely dressed, their hands and feet frozen stiff, their skin burned by frostbite. Some had no clothes at all, only underwear, but the further the rescuers searched, the stranger it got. One hiker had a fractured skull with no sign of external trauma, as if the force came from inside. Another had broken ribs so severe it looked like she'd been hit by a car. One woman's tongue was missing. Her eyes, too, and the radiation levels on some of their clothing were abnormally high. Now, you can imagine how quickly this turned from a simple rescue mission to something much darker. The official Soviet investigation ruled the cause of death as a compelling natural force. That's it, case closed. But what does that even mean? What natural force rips open a tent from the inside and drives 9 rational adults into a frozen forest half-dressed? People have spent decades trying to answer that question. Some said it was an avalanche, but the slope was too gentle. Others blamed a secret military test. Maybe a parachute mine or a weapon the government wanted to keep quiet. There are reports of glowing orbs in the sky that night, strange lights seen by witnesses miles away. Some researchers believe the hikers might have been disoriented by infrasound, low frequency vibrations produced by the wind that can cause panic, hallucinations, and irrational fear. But even that doesn't explain the internal injuries that looked more like blunt, force trauma from a car crash. So what really happened? Let's talk about what we know and what we don't. The tent's position and the hikers' footprints show they left calmly at first, walking in a single file line. That doesn't fit with the idea of pure panic. Something spooked them enough to leave shelter, but not enough to make them run immediately. It's almost as if they expected to come back soon. Then there's the radiation. The Soviet Union, at the time, was testing military weapons in nearby regions. Some of the hikers had connections to those facilities through their university. Could they have stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to see? Or were they caught in the aftermath of a test gone wrong? There's also the possibility of a chemical or sonic reaction that caused disorientation, bleeding, and internal damage. Yet, no residue, no weapon, no physical evidence of any experiment was ever found. And then comes the human element, the thing science always struggles to measure: fear. When your mind turns on you in extreme cold, reality becomes distorted. Hypothermia can make you feel hot, causing victims to strip off their clothes, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. Panic can turn into group hysteria. One wrong judgment becomes contagious. Maybe one person heard something, thought the mountain was collapsing, and the rest followed without question. It's not impossible. But it's not satisfying either, because it still doesn't explain the massive blunt injuries. It doesn't explain the missing tongue. In 2019, modern researchers ran computer simulations that suggested a rare kind of small avalanche might have hit the tent. Not enough to bury it completely, but enough to crush the people inside. They linked it to something called a slab avalanche, triggered by a specific wind pattern and snow density. It's a neat theory. It checks some boxes. But even the scientists behind it admitted it can't explain all of it. The radiation, the missing body parts, the strange orange skin tone described by rescuers. Something still doesn't fit, and that's what keeps this story alive. The Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just about death on a mountainside. It's about the edges of human understanding, where fear, nature, and the unknown blur together. Because every time someone thinks they've cracked it, another question rises. If it was an avalanche, why did the tent stay partially standing? If it was a secret test, why no trace of debris or contamination? If it was psychological breakdown, why did it happen to all 9 simultaneously, in the exact same way? Maybe that's the part that gets under your skin. The fact that logic wants to solve it, but emotion refuses to let go. We want a clean explanation because it makes the world feel safer. But the Dyatlov Pass doesn't give us that. It whispers the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, even with all our science and reason, there are moments we still can't make sense of. 9 people went into the snow and never came back the same. Their final moments were a puzzle locked between fear, nature, and something else. Something we may never fully understand. And maybe that's exactly why this story refuses to fade. Because somewhere in that frozen silence, beneath decades of theories and files, the mountain still holds its secret, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Oumuamua. It was October of 2017 when astronomers spotted something streaking through our solar system that made them stop dead in their tracks. At first, it looked like an asteroid, just another chunk of rock drifting through space. But within hours, it became clear. This thing was different. It wasn't from here. It came from outside our solar system. And even stranger, it wasn't behaving like anything nature had ever shown us before. They named it Oumuamua, a Hawaiian word meaning a messenger from afar arriving first. And that name couldn't have been more fitting, because this visitor wasn't just another space rock. It was the first confirmed interstellar object ever detected. That alone was history-making. But then it started doing things that made scientists uncomfortable. When Oumuamua first appeared in the data, it was moving faster than any known comet or asteroid. The speed made sense for something coming from another star system, about 54 miles per second. But as it passed through our solar system, it began to accelerate. Not slow down, as gravity would predict. Accelerate. That's not something a rock can do on its own. Now, usually when comets speed up, it's because they're releasing gas and dust as they heat up near the sun. That outgassing acts like a natural rocket, pushing them forward. But Oumuamua had no visible tail. No gas, no dust. Nothing. It was dry, silent, and somehow gaining speed. That's when people started to whisper. What if it's not a rock? Even its shape didn't make sense. Based on the way its brightness flickered, it seemed to be incredibly long and thin, maybe 10 times longer than it was wide. Imagine a shiny, spinning cigar or maybe a flat shard, tumbling end over end through space. Nothing in our solar system looks like that. Nature doesn't make perfect geometric anomalies, especially not ones that act like they have their own propulsion system. Astronomers at Harvard, including Avi Loeb, started asking uncomfortable questions. What if Oumuamua was artificial? Not a ship exactly, but something built. A probe, a fragment, a light sail, a thin, reflective object pushed by starlight. That idea set off a storm in the scientific community. Some laughed it off. Others didn't. Because, honestly, what else could explain the way it moved? NASA and the European Space Agency tried every natural explanation they could think of. Maybe it was a piece of nitrogen ice, like a shard from a Pluto-like planet, that could cause outgassing we couldn't see. Maybe it was a pancake-shaped comet that reflected light differently. Or maybe it was made of some exotic material, like solid hydrogen or dust so fine that it left no visible trail. But every theory seemed to hit a wall. Either it didn't match the data, or it required conditions that are nearly impossible in nature. And that's when the conversation started to shift. What if this was the first piece of interstellar technology we've ever seen? Think about it. If another civilization wanted to explore distant star systems, they wouldn't send something huge and obvious. They'd send small, fast, durable probes that could survive for millions of years, drifting through space until they passed near a system like ours. Oumuamua could have been just that. An ancient relic, still coasting on its original momentum, its purpose long forgotten. But let's pause for a second. Why does this idea make people so uneasy? Because science is supposed to deal in evidence, and Oumuamua didn't stick around long enough for us to get more of it. Within weeks, it was gone, moving too fast for any telescope to follow. All we have are a few frames of data, a light curve, and a list of behaviors that don't add up. No images, no samples, no second chances. That vacuum of certainty created something rare. A moment when even scientists had to admit they didn't know. And humans don't do well with not knowing. We crave closure. We want to file mysteries into neat boxes labeled "explained." But Oumuamua refused to fit. Here's what really gets under people's skin. In 2023, a second interstellar object was confirmed, Comet Borisov. Unlike Oumuamua, Borisov behaved exactly how a comet should. It had a tail, outgassing, and a chemical composition that made perfect sense, which only made Oumuamua look even stranger in comparison. If Borisov is what we expect from interstellar visitors, then what was Oumuamua? Some researchers think it might be part of a new class of objects, something between a comet and an asteroid that behaves differently because of its material or its origin. Others still hold on to the idea that it could be artificial. Avi Loeb went so far as to launch the Galileo project, an ongoing search for evidence of extraterrestrial technology in our cosmic neighborhood. And he's not treating it like science fiction. He's treating it like data waiting to be found. There's a psychological twist to all of this, too. The idea that we might have already encountered something built by another intelligence, and then just watched it fly away, stirs something primal in us. It makes us wonder how often we've missed things like this. How many other asteroids we've brushed off as ordinary, when they could be messages, machines, or remnants of civilizations that came and went long before ours. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that Oumuamua was alien, but that it forced science to confront how limited our understanding still is. We've mapped our planets, sent probes to the edges of the solar system, but when something truly unknown arrives, we still scramble for explanations that fit inside our comfort zone. Oumuamua came and went in just over 2 months. It never flashed a signal. It never slowed down. It simply drifted through our sun's light, turned slightly, and vanished into the dark, leaving us with more questions than answers. And maybe that's exactly what a messenger from afar is supposed to do. Not to explain itself, but to remind us that out there, in the vast black between the stars, we are still very much in the dark. The Voynich Manuscript. It sits in a locked glass case at Yale University. A book that shouldn't exist. Written in a language no one has ever spoken. Illustrated with plants that don't grow on this planet, and filled with symbols that have defied every codebreaker for over 600 years. This is the Voynich Manuscript, the world's most mysterious book, and to this day no one can read a single word of it. At first glance, it looks almost innocent. About 240 pages long, bound in calfskin, the handwriting neat and consistent, as if whoever wrote it did so with purpose. But then you open it, and you realize this isn't like anything else from the medieval world. Every page is covered in looping script that flows like real writing. Grammar, structure, rhythm. But the words belong to no known alphabet. It's not Latin, not Greek, not Arabic, not Hebrew. It's not any human language ever recorded, and the drawings make it even stranger. There are hundreds of them. Plants that don't exist, circular diagrams that look like astronomical charts, and naked women bathing in green pools connected by tubes like biological plumbing. It's bizarre, mesmerizing, and unsettling all at once. You get the sense that whoever made this book was trying to say something incredibly important, but in a way no one else could ever understand. The manuscript was discovered in 1912 by a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich, who found it in a Jesuit library near Rome. From the start, it was a mystery. Inside was a letter from the 1600s suggesting the book once belonged to Emperor Rudolph II, a man obsessed with alchemy and the occult. He supposedly paid a fortune, the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars, for it, believing it was written by the legendary philosopher Roger Bacon. But even then, no one could read it. When Voynich brought it to light, the world's best minds tried to crack it. Cryptographers, linguists, mathematicians, even military code experts. During World War II, some of the same people who broke Nazi ciphers tried their hand at the Voynich Manuscript. They all failed. The text refuses to break. It's too structured to be random, but too chaotic to be any known code. Modern analysis shows that the writing has statistical patterns similar to real language. Word frequency, sentence rhythm, repetition, but the words themselves are gibberish. That's what makes it so maddening. It behaves like language, but doesn't belong to any linguistic family. It's like someone created the idea of communication without actually meaning anything. So naturally, theories started piling up. Some think it's an elaborate hoax, a medieval prank designed to fool a wealthy collector. But that idea starts to crumble when you realize how much time and precision went into it. The handwriting is perfect and consistent over hundreds of pages. That's not the work of someone trying to scam a nobleman. That's obsession. Others claim it's a cipher hiding secret alchemical knowledge, medical formulas, or even an encoded map to something lost. There are whole sections filled with astronomical diagrams, moons, and stars, but none that match the known constellations of Earth. And then there are the more unconventional ideas. Some believe it's written in an alien language. Others think it's the work of a human who entered some altered mental state. Automatic writing, a kind of stream of consciousness channeled from somewhere else. There's even speculation that it could be an attempt at a universal language, something invented centuries before the concept existed. In 2018, a researcher claimed to have cracked the code, saying the text was a mix of Latin shorthand and obscure dialects describing women's health and herbal remedies. The media went wild, until other experts looked closer and found the translation didn't make sense. The grammar was forced, the meanings inconsistent. Within weeks, the claim was dismissed. Another failed attempt. Even artificial intelligence, with all its power, has tried and failed. Machine learning models trained on hundreds of languages can detect patterns that the human eye misses. But when fed the Voynich Manuscript, the algorithms broke down. It's as if the book sits right at the edge of human logic. Too structured to be nonsense, too meaningless to be decoded. So what could it be? One compelling theory suggests the author created their own private language, a constructed system of symbols and sounds known only to them. Psychologists have a name for this kind of behavior: glossolalia, or invented speech. Sometimes, people under intense creative or spiritual experiences begin producing languages only they can understand. If that's what happened, then the Voynich Manuscript might not be hiding a secret at all. It might be a mirror of the human mind, written in a language born entirely inside one person's imagination. But there's something eerie about how deliberate it feels. Every stroke of ink, every strange illustration, feels like it was made for someone. Maybe even for us. Some researchers have pointed out that the manuscript's pages are arranged in distinct sections: botanical, astronomical, biological, pharmaceutical. It's almost like a guidebook for a world that isn't ours. What if it's not nonsense, but a record of knowledge we can't yet comprehend? Think about this: everything we've learned about the universe, from DNA to dark matter, was once impossible to decode. Maybe the Voynich Manuscript is another puzzle that requires the right key, one we haven't discovered yet. Maybe it's not about who wrote it, but when it was meant to be understood. And that's the part that gets under your skin, because deep down, every human wants meaning. We want to believe everything was written for a reason, that there's a code waiting to be cracked, a message waiting to be revealed. But maybe the Voynich Manuscript isn't meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to remind us of how fragile understanding really is. How even in a world overflowing with information, there are still things that whisper just beyond our reach. A book no one can read, a language no one speaks, and a silence that has lasted more than 6 centuries. Whatever secret it holds, The Voynich Manuscript continues to do the one thing that science, reason, and time can't undo. It refuses to make sense. The wow signal. It was a quiet summer night in August of 1977 when something extraordinary hit a radio telescope in Ohio. A signal so strong, so precise, and so utterly unexplainable that the man who saw it circled the printout in red ink and scribbled a single word in the margin: wow. That one word became the name for one of the greatest mysteries in the history of science. The wow signal. To understand why this single burst of radio noise sent scientists spiraling for decades, you have to know what they were listening for. The Big Air Radio Telescope at Ohio State University was scanning the skies for any artificial radio signals, the kind of deliberate transmissions that could indicate intelligent life somewhere out there. Most nights, it was nothing but static and cosmic background noise. Then, out of nowhere, came a signal that stood out like a flare in the dark. It lasted for exactly 72 seconds, the time it took for Earth's rotation to move the telescope's view past one point in the sky. It wasn't random noise, it wasn't static, and it wasn't from Earth. The signal was narrow band, locked on a single frequency near 1420 megahertz. That's the natural emission line of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. And for decades, scientists had speculated that if any intelligent civilization wanted to communicate across space, they'd probably use that same frequency, because hydrogen, quite literally, connects all of us. So when astronomer Jerry Emmon saw that spike on the printout, perfectly matching that frequency, it wasn't just a blip. It was as if someone had whispered across the galaxy in the one language every civilization would understand. He circled it, wrote, "Wow," next to it, and for the first time, humanity had a candidate, a possible message from deep space. The signal came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, near a group of stars known as Chi Sagittarii. But when scientists tried to find it again, it was gone. No repeat signal, no follow-up transmission, just silence. They kept listening. Days turned into weeks, then years. Nothing. The wow signal appeared once, and never again. At first, everyone thought it had to be something earthly, maybe a satellite, a plane, a secret military transmission, even a glitch. But one by one, those possibilities were ruled out. The frequency was too pure, too consistent, and it didn't match any known technology on Earth at the time. It wasn't the kind of random interference you'd get from weather or electronics either. It behaved exactly like a deliberate broadcast. That's what made it so frustrating. It was the best evidence of an extraterrestrial message ever recorded, and yet, without repetition, there was nothing to study. Science demands patterns, repeatable results. But the universe gave us only a single wordless moment, a flash, and then silence. In the years that followed, researchers ran every test imaginable. They compared the frequency against known satellite records, scanned for comets, analyzed cosmic radiation. One theory suggested it might have been caused by a comet releasing hydrogen gas as it passed by. But that fell apart when later observations didn't match. Others claimed it could have been an Earth-based signal bouncing off space debris. But the direction and signal strength didn't fit that either. And so, the wow signal stayed in limbo, not proven to be alien but impossible to explain away. Which, of course, drove people insane. Because humans hate loose ends, especially ones that whisper from the stars. Now, let's be honest. The idea that it came from intelligent life is electrifying. Imagine it. Somewhere, light years away, Another civilization could have been sending out a steady beacon, maybe not to us specifically, but just into the void, hoping someone out there would hear it. And for 72 seconds, we did. Then we looked away, and it was gone. But here's where it gets weird. The signal's intensity curve, how it rose and fell in strength, perfectly matched what you'd expect from something fixed in space as Earth rotated past it. That's not easy to fake. That's exactly what you'd see from a distant transmission millions of miles away. Not a plane, not a satellite, something stationary deep in the cosmos. Still, scientists like Emin himself stayed cautious. He famously said, "It's probably not aliens," because in science, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But that doesn't mean he wasn't tempted to believe. He admitted later that nothing about the signal fit neatly into any known category. It was like catching a glimpse of something through fog, too brief to name, too clear to ignore. Decades later, modern telescopes have scanned that same patch of sky again and again. The SETI Institute, NASA, independent observatories, all have listened, hoping to hear that same whisper. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the universe. And yet, the legend of the "wow" signal refuses to fade. Because here's the part that sticks with you. That signal was right where logic says we should find something. Not random noise, not a lucky coincidence, but right on the cosmic calling card that any advanced civilization would likely use. It's as if the universe reached out, tapped us on the shoulder, and then slipped back into silence before we could turn around. And maybe that's exactly what makes it so haunting. Not that it was aliens, but that, for a moment, it could have been. It reminded us how vast and quiet the cosmos really is, and how even the smallest signal can shake our understanding of where we stand in it. Think about it. In all of human history, only once have we received a signal like that. Not a voice, not a message, not a pattern of ones and zeros. Just a clear, deliberate tone from the deep. A single "hello" across the stars, never repeated, never explained. So maybe the "wow" signal wasn't proof of extraterrestrials. Maybe it was something even more profound. Proof of how ready we are to listen. Proof that deep down, no matter how rational we claim to be, there's a part of us that still looks up at the night sky and hopes that, someday, someone might be looking back. The Shroud of Turin. It's one of the most studied, argued over, and emotionally charged relics in human history. A single piece of cloth that seems to hold the face of a crucified man. The Shroud of Turin. For centuries, people have looked at it and seen something holy, something divine, maybe even the physical evidence of the resurrection itself. And yet, science has never been able to fully explain it. Every test, every theory, every attempt to solve it has only made the mystery deeper. The shroud itself is simple. A long piece of linen, a little over 14 feet long, bearing the faint front and back image of a man. You can see his wounds, pierced wrists and feet, blood on the forehead from what looks like a crown of thorns, a gash in the side. The image is soft, almost ghost-like, as if burned into the fabric by light instead of paint or pigment. When it's photographed, the negative image reveals something stunning, a detailed, lifelike face staring back, calm yet haunting. That moment, when the negative was first developed in 1898, changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a relic. It was a photograph of the impossible. From that point on, the Shroud of Turin became both a symbol of faith and a battleground for reason. The Catholic Church has never officially declared it to be the burial cloth of Jesus, but it has also never denied that possibility. Scientists, skeptics, and believers have been fighting over it for more than 100 years, and the more we study it, the stranger it gets. The first thing people tried to do was prove it was fake. In the Middle Ages, there were endless forgeries of holy relics, bones of saints, fragments of the cross, even vials of supposed holy blood. So in 1988, 3 separate laboratories performed carbon dating tests on small samples of the cloth. The results came back with a clear answer. It was made sometime between the years 1260 and 1390. That would make it a medieval creation, not a first-century artifact. Case closed, right? Except not quite, because soon after, other scientists began questioning those results. The corner of the cloth used for testing may have been part of a repair patch added during the Middle Ages, after the shroud was damaged in a fire. Later chemical analysis found differences in the tested fibers compared to the rest of the fabric, suggesting the carbon dating might have been contaminated. And so, the door reopened. Then there's the image itself. It's not painted. Under a microscope, there's no brushwork, no pigment embedded in the fibers. The image sits only on the very top surface, a layer thinner than a human hair. It's not made of dye, or scorch, or chemical reaction that anyone has been able to reproduce. Modern scientists have tried lasers, radiation, heat, even high-voltage discharges, and still haven't fully replicated it. Whatever created that image, it wasn't a technique anyone knows from the 1300s, or even from today. Some believe the image could have been formed by a burst of radiant energy, something like light or heat, that somehow imprinted a negative image of the body onto the cloth. That idea has fueled theories linking it to the resurrection itself, that at the moment of transformation, a flash of energy or light could have left behind a physical trace. To believers, that's proof of divinity. To scientists, it's an intriguing hypothesis that defies physics. But not all mysteries need miracles. There are natural explanations that make sense, or at least almost make sense. Some researchers suggest the image might have formed through chemical reactions between the linen and gases released by a decomposing body. Others think it's an ancient photographic process, perhaps using sunlight and natural compounds. But every time someone tries to reproduce the effect, it falls short. The shading, the proportions, the three-dimensional quality of the image, nothing matches perfectly. It's as if the image exists in a space between science and art, between matter and myth. Even the blood stains on the shroud raise questions. Tests have confirmed they contain real human hemoglobin, and under ultraviolet light, they fluoresce in ways consistent with actual blood. But the pattern of the wounds, the direction of flow, and the accuracy of the markings have sparked intense debate. Some experts say they're anatomically flawless, too perfect for a medieval forger to imagine. Others argue they look more like deliberate placement than the natural imprint of a body. The more you zoom in, the harder it becomes to decide which side you're on. There's also the strange realism of the image itself. When digital 3D analysis was done on the shroud in the 1970s, researchers found that the shading of the image contained depth information, meaning it wasn't just a flat picture, but a topographical map of a human form. No artist, especially in the 1300s, could have predicted that. It's like a fingerprint of light wrapped around a body that's no longer there. So what do we do with that? For some, the answer is simple. Faith fills the gaps that science can't. For others, the mystery itself is the point. because the shroud forces us to look at the thin border between belief and evidence, where the human need for certainty collides with the limits of knowledge. Whether it's divine or not, it reveals something powerful about us. That even in a world built on data and analysis, we're still drawn to the inexplicable. Maybe that's why the Shroud of Turin continues to captivate both scientists and believers alike. It's not just about what it is, it's about what it represents. A moment frozen in time, a question carved into Lenin. Every test brings us closer to the fabric itself, but never closer to the truth it might hold. And maybe that's the lesson. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some are meant to make us wonder, to remind us that even after centuries of study and technology, we're still standing in awe before the unknown, staring at a faint image that might be nothing more than linen and age, or might just be the face of the divine. The Mandela Effect. It starts with a feeling, that quiet jolt when you realize something you remember so clearly never actually happened. You're certain the Monopoly man wore a monocle. He didn't. You remember the Berenstain Bears spelled with stain. It's actually Berenstain. You remember Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father." He never said that. He said, "No, I am your father." And suddenly, you start to wonder, how can so many people be so confidently wrong in exactly the same way? That's the strange phenomenon we call the Mandela Effect. It got its name because thousands of people all around the world swore that Nelson Mandela had died in prison during the 1980s. They could even recall watching his funeral on television. But Mandela didn't die until 2013. It's as if two versions of history collided, one we remember and one we're living in now. Now, here's the unsettling part. This isn't just about bad memory or confusion. The Mandela Effect isn't one or two people misremembering a detail. It's entire groups sharing the same false memories, with vivid details that line up almost perfectly. People aren't just wrong, they're certain. And that certainty is what makes this phenomenon so eerie. Psychologists have tried to explain it. They say it's a kind of collective false memory, a glitch in how our brains store and retrieve information. When we remember something, we're not pulling up a perfect recording, we're reconstructing it piece by piece. Every time we recall a memory, it changes slightly. Over time, details blur, and our brains fill in the gaps with what feels right. If enough people do this in similar ways, influenced by culture, suggestion, or shared media, an entire false history can emerge. That's called confabulation, and it's completely natural. But that explanation, logical as it is, doesn't really satisfy the feeling that something deeper might be going on. Because some Mandela Effect examples are too weird, too specific. Like the movie Shazam, which so many people remember starring the comedian Sinbad as a genie. It never existed, but thousands of people remember watching it. They can describe the VHS cover, the scenes, the dialogue. It's not just a vague memory. It's a collective experience that somehow never happened. And then there are people who take the idea a step further. What if we're not just remembering wrong? What if we're remembering right, but from somewhere else? A parallel timeline. A reality slightly out of sync with this one. The theory goes that we, or the world itself, somehow shifted from one version of reality into another. Maybe it was quantum. Maybe it was cosmic. Maybe it was something we'll never understand. But in that shift, small details changed. Spelling, symbols, even historical events. Now, science doesn't officially support this, But quantum physics does leave room for some mind-bending possibilities. According to the many worlds interpretation, every decision, every random event spawns a new universe, a new version of reality. Infinite branching timelines all existing simultaneously. If that's true, then there could be countless versions of us out there, each living slightly different lives, remembering slightly different things. And if somehow, for reasons we can't measure, those realities occasionally overlap, what we call the Mandela Effect could be the residue of that collision. It sounds wild, but even physicists admit that at the smallest scales, reality doesn't behave the way we think it should. Particles exist in multiple states at once until observed. Entangled atoms affect each other instantaneously across distance. The universe is stranger than logic allows. So is it really so impossible that consciousness, or memory, could be tied to more than one version of reality at a time? Of course, not everyone's ready to jump to parallel worlds. Some neuroscientists think the Mandela Effect reveals something profound about how human beings process truth. We tend to remember meaning more than detail. We compress, simplify, and connect dots until our memories tell the story that feels most coherent. The Monopoly man should have a monocle because he's rich and looks like Mr. Peanut. The Berenstain Bears should end in Steen because that's a familiar pattern. Our brains prefer order and familiarity, even if it's wrong. But there's another side to this, the emotional side. Because the Mandela Effect doesn't just challenge facts, it challenges identity. When people realize their memories don't match reality, it shakes something inside them. If you can't trust your own memories, what can you trust? That's where the real fear lies, not in the idea of parallel universes, but in the idea that reality itself might be less stable than we believe. And maybe that's why this phenomenon has exploded online. Communities form around shared, misremembered events, gathering evidence, screenshots, old books, even vintage recordings that seem to prove one version of reality over another. It's not just curiosity, it's a search for belonging. When you find someone who remembers the same impossible detail you do, it's comforting. You feel less crazy, more connected. Maybe in some strange way, the Mandela Effect is less about the past and more about the human need to find order in chaos. But there's still that nagging question that logic can't completely smother. What if we really did shift realities? What if the world we're in right now isn't quite the one we started in? The spelling on a cereal box, the dialogue in a movie, the memory of a world leader's death. These tiny cracks in our shared timeline might be hints, not errors. Maybe we're catching glimpses of the seams that hold our version of existence together. Whatever the cause, the Mandela Effect exposes something beautifully terrifying about being human. We live in a reality we can't fully trust, guided by memories that may not be real. Yet we keep searching for truth, for proof that the world is exactly as we remember it. Maybe that's the real mystery, because in the end, whether it's faulty memory or fractured universes, the Mandela Effect forces us to confront a truth that science itself still wrestles with. That perception is not the same as reality, and somewhere, maybe just one quantum thread away, there could be another version of you, insisting just as passionately that you're the one who's wrong. The Antikythera Mechanism, it started with a storm. In the year 1900, a group of sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera took shelter from rough seas. When the water finally calmed, they dove, expecting coral, maybe fish, maybe treasure. But what they found wasn't gold or jewels. It was a shipwreck buried in centuries of sand. And inside that wreck, they pulled up something that shouldn't have existed. A lump of corroded bronze, gears fused together, crumbling from age. At first, no one thought much of it. It looked like debris. But decades later, that strange artifact would change everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Because hidden inside that lump of metal was a machine from more than 2,000 years ago. Built with such precision, it shouldn't have been possible. Today, we call it the Antikythera Mechanism. But make no mistake, this isn't some simple relic. It's the world's first known analog computer. When researchers cleaned and studied it, they discovered gears upon gears, finely crafted bronze cogs that could predict the motion of the sun, the moon, and even eclipses. Imagine that. The ancient Greeks, before telescopes, before modern mathematics, before any concept of technology as we know it, built a device capable of modeling the heavens with mechanical accuracy. This thing could literally simulate the universe. Let that sink in for a second. The Antikythera Mechanism dates back to around 100 BCE, over 2,000 years ago. That's more than 1,000 years before anything remotely similar appeared again in human history. Its complexity wasn't just advanced, it was impossible by the standards of its time. The gears were cut so precisely that even modern clockmakers are stunned by their accuracy. It's like finding a smartphone inside a pyramid. So what was it for? The writing on its surface, barely visible after centuries underwater, described planetary positions, eclipse cycles, and calendar systems. By turning a crank, you could track celestial events, lunar phases, solar eclipses, even the timing of ancient games like the Olympics. In other words, it was an ancient Greek computer designed to calculate the movements of the cosmos. And somehow it worked. But here's where the mystery deepens. How did anyone 2,000 years ago even know enough about the cosmos to build something like this? The Greeks had brilliant thinkers. Archimedes, Hipparchus, and others. But even their known theories don't fully explain the level of precision this device required. Some historians believe it must have been inspired by lost knowledge, maybe from a civilization we haven't yet discovered, or from technological advances that were erased by time and war. The more scientists study it, the stranger it gets. For decades, the mechanism sat misunderstood, locked in museums, dismissed as a curiosity. Then, in the early 2000s, researchers used X-ray tomography to scan inside the corroded fragments. What they found looked like the blueprints of a machine far ahead of its era. Interlocking gears, engraved dials, and inscriptions detailing astronomical cycles with breathtaking accuracy. The mechanism tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period that aligns the solar and lunar calendars, something that took modern science centuries to formalize. And the craftsmanship, that's what leaves experts speechless. The teeth of the gears were hand-cut, yet mathematically precise. The layout followed complex ratios that perfectly matched the known orbital patterns of celestial bodies. This wasn't the work of trial and error, it was engineering. Intentional, deliberate, scientific engineering, from a time when people still believed the gods controlled the skies. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What else did ancient civilizations know that we've forgotten? If the Greeks had the ability to build mechanical computers, what happened to that knowledge? Why didn't it spark an industrial revolution 2,000 years early? Some historians think the technology was lost in the chaos that followed the fall of the ancient world, knowledge buried under centuries of war, fire, and empire. Others believe devices like the Antikythera Mechanism were rare, built for elites, philosophers, or astronomers whose work never survived the passage of time. But there's another theory, that this wasn't a one-of-a-kind invention, that there may have been many such machines scattered across the ancient world waiting to be discovered. And yet, there's something deeper going on here. The Antikythera Mechanism isn't just a marvel of mechanics. It's a mirror reflecting the human mind's endless drive to understand the universe. We tend to think of progress as a straight line, primitive to advanced, superstition to science. But this artifact proves that genius isn't bound by time. The people who built this weren't guessing. They were thinking, calculating, modeling, just like modern scientists today. Even now, we don't fully understand how they did it. The device's design is so intricate that teams of engineers have spent years trying to reconstruct it, gear by gear, just to see it work again. And when it does, something extraordinary happens. You realize that 2,000 years ago, someone stood at that same crank, turning it slowly, watching the heavens align on the dials, understanding, perhaps better than anyone since, how the cosmos moved. It's humbling, almost eerie, because it forces us to question the story we tell ourselves about civilization, that technology is always advancing, that history always moves forward. The Antikythera Mechanism whispers a different story, one where brilliance can appear, blaze bright, and vanish into obscurity, only to be rediscovered centuries later by accident. Maybe that's why this relic captivates scientists and dreamers alike. It doesn't just show that ancient humans were smart, it proves that they might have been smarter than we give them credit for. That somewhere, long before our modern machines, someone already built the first computer, not out of silicon and code, but out of bronze and imagination. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Antikythera Mechanism. It's not just a window into the past. It's a reminder that innovation isn't a timeline. It's a spark. One that can appear anywhere, in any age, when curiosity meets brilliance. And sometimes, as the waves crash and the centuries roll by, that spark waits quietly beneath the sea, until the right moment, the right storm, brings it back to light. The Tunguska Explosion, early morning, June 30th, 1908. In the remote wilderness of Siberia, near the Tunguska River, the sky erupted. A flash brighter than the sun, a shock wave that flattened 80 million trees, and a thunderous roar that could be heard hundreds of miles away. People saw a pillar of fire tearing through the heavens, followed by a blast so powerful it shattered windows and knocked people off their feet nearly 40 miles from the epicenter. The air rippled with heat. Animals fled. The ground shook, and when the dust finally settled, more than 800 square miles of forest lay flattened. But there was no crater, no meteorite, nothing. That's what makes the Tunguska event one of the most perplexing scientific mysteries in history. The most powerful explosion ever recorded before the atomic age, and no clear explanation for what caused it. When news reached scientists in Europe, they couldn't believe it. Eyewitnesses described a glowing object streaking across the morning sky, followed by a massive detonation that lit up the horizon. Some said it was the wrath of the gods. Others thought it was a volcanic eruption or a doomsday comet, but the site was so remote that no official investigation could begin for nearly 2 decades. When researchers finally reached the area in 1927, led by Russian scientist Leonid Kulik, what they found was staggering. Millions of trees lying in a perfect radial pattern, all pointing away from a single epicenter. The force had been so intense that the ground beneath them was scarred, yet there was no impact crater, no meteorite fragments, no sign of anything that could explain the devastation. The energy released was estimated at 15 megatons, about 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But how does something that powerful appear out of nowhere, flatten a forest the size of a major city, and leave no trace of what caused it? The leading theory is that a massive meteor or comet entered Earth's atmosphere at high speed and exploded midair, what scientists call an airburst. The object never actually hit the ground. Instead, it disintegrated 5 to 10 miles above the surface, releasing its energy outward in a shockwave. That would explain the absence of a crater. But even that theory doesn't solve everything. If a meteor exploded in the sky, why has no significant fragment ever been found? Search teams have combed the region for decades, collecting microscopic bits of silicate and metal that might be extraterrestrial, but nothing definitive. Even the pattern of destruction is strange. Trees at the very center of the blast remained standing, stripped of branches but not burned, while everything around them was leveled outward. It's a signature unlike any known impact event. Then there's the timing. Local reports said that for several nights after the explosion, skies across Europe glowed bright enough to read by. Scientists later determined that this was likely caused by fine dust particles in the upper atmosphere scattering sunlight. But some eyewitnesses in Siberia described something else. A beam of blue, white light traveling across the sky moments before the explosion, followed by an intense heat wave that scorched the earth. It wasn't just a bang. It was a phenomenon. That's where the more controversial theories come in. Some believe the Tunguska Explosion wasn't a meteor at all, but a fragment of a comet composed mostly of ice and gas. When it hit the dense atmosphere, it vaporized completely, leaving behind nothing solid to find. Others speculate that it could have been the result of a natural gas explosion from deep within the Earth, triggered by seismic activity. But none of these ideas fully explain the symmetry, the scale, or the intensity of the blast. And then there are the wilder ideas, that it was an alien spacecraft that self-destructed, or a failed experiment from an advanced civilization, or even an early test of some cosmic weapon. To be fair, those theories usually appear when science runs out of neat answers, but even the most grounded scientists admit the data doesn't fit perfectly into any single explanation. Fast forward to recent decades. Modern studies using satellite imagery, soil samples, and advanced computer modeling have confirmed that whatever exploded over Tunguska released energy consistent with an object around 100 to 200 feet wide, entering the atmosphere at incredible speed. That kind of impact is rare, but not impossible. Still, every time a new theory rises, another anomaly appears to keep the mystery alive. For example, no clear fragments of extraterrestrial material have ever been conclusively tied to the event. Some samples contain high levels of iridium and nickel, both common in meteorites, but not enough to confirm their origin. Others found traces of microscopic glass beads, suggesting temperatures high enough to melt sand into silica. But again, no solid core, no remains, no meteorite. It's like the sky opened, released its fury, and vanished. And here's something that still gives scientists chills. If the Tunguska Explosion had occurred just 4 hours later, the Earth's rotation would have shifted the impact directly over St. Petersburg. An entire city could have been wiped off the map. That's how close the world came to an unimaginable disaster. The event has since become a touchstone for everything we fear about the cosmos. The reminder that space isn't empty, and that our planet lives under a constant shower of silent visitors. We rarely think about it, but Earth is hit by thousands of tons of space material every day. Most burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere. Tunguska reminds us what happens when one doesn't. Yet, even with modern science, computer models, and over a century of investigation, there's still something elusive about it. Because no one saw the object hit, no one found the debris, and no one has been able to fully replicate the exact pattern of destruction in a simulation. The explosion was real, but its cause remains, in some ways, imaginary. Maybe that's what makes Tunguska so haunting. It sits at the edge of science, half understood, half myth, a place where logic and legend meet in the same burned forest. It's the universe reminding us how fragile we really are, how little control we have, and how sometimes the most powerful forces of nature leave behind only silence and questions. Over 100 years later, the trees have grown back, the scars have faded, but the mystery hasn't. Somewhere over the Siberian wilderness, the air still carries the memory of that impossible blast, a cosmic event without a trace, a question that science still can't quite answer. The Piri Reis Map, it began as a curiosity, a tattered old parchment discovered in 1929 in the Topkapi Palace of Istanbul. It looked like any other ancient map, drawn in vibrant ink on gazelle skin, covered in cryptic notes and sketches of strange coastlines. But when scholars took a closer look, they realized this wasn't just any map. It was something that shouldn't exist, because drawn on that faded parchment, centuries before modern exploration, was a remarkably accurate depiction of the coast of Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't officially be discovered for almost 300 years. This artifact, known as the Piri Reis Map, has puzzled historians, scientists, and cartographers for nearly a century. Created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, it combined data from dozens of older sources, maps from the time of Columbus, ancient charts, and even documents that no longer exist today. But what really caught everyone's attention wasn't what it showed. It was how it showed it. The lower section of the map appears to depict the northern coastline of Antarctica. But here's the kicker: it's drawn without ice. The landmass beneath the frozen continent, its true geological shape, wasn't fully mapped until the 20th century, using sonar and satellite imaging. Yet somehow, a map drawn over 500 years ago seems to show the same contours, the same bays, the same mountain ranges that modern science only recently confirmed. How could that be possible? When the map was rediscovered, the Turkish government sent it to experts at the U.S. Navy Hydrographic Office. The analysts who studied it were stunned. Its accuracy in depicting the coastlines of South America and Africa suggested knowledge of advanced navigation and measurement techniques, things that should have been impossible for the early 16th century. And when they noticed the southern landmass, they were even more baffled. At the time the map was created, Antarctica wasn't just undiscovered. It was completely unknown. Europeans didn't even believe a southern continent existed yet. So where did Piri Reis get his information? According to his own notes, written right on the map, he based it on older charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He claimed to have used maps drawn by ancient sailors, including some from before the flood. That phrase alone set off centuries of speculation, because if true, it could suggest that this knowledge came from a civilization that existed long before recorded history, one capable of global navigation. Now, most historians agree that the Piri Reis Map is real. It's not a forgery or a hoax. But its details raise questions science still can't comfortably answer. Was it really showing Antarctica? Or could that southern coastline simply be an exaggerated extension of South America, drawn from incomplete information? Some scholars argue it's just an artistic guess, a result of cartographic error. But that explanation doesn't sit right with everyone, because the proportions and alignments are eerily precise. The latitude and longitude appear too accurate for a map made before the invention of the chronometer, the device that allows sailors to measure longitude at sea. And that leads to a much bigger question. How did the ancients, whoever they were, gather data that precise? To map Antarctica's true coastline, the continent would have had to be ice-free, something that hasn't been the case for at least 6,000 years. So, if the Piri Reis Map does indeed show Antarctica without ice, it would suggest that the original source material came from a time before recorded civilization. That's a bold claim, and it's exactly why this map has become such a lightning rod for mystery. There are theories, some grounded, some wild. One suggests that early mariners from lost civilizations, maybe from the ancient Mediterranean or even before, had access to advanced seafaring knowledge we've since lost. Another theory points to the possibility of prehistoric exploration by unknown cultures, capable of global mapping long before the Egyptians, the Greeks, or the Phoenicians. And then there's the controversial idea that the map is a surviving echo of a civilization like Atlantis, one that mastered navigation and astronomy before vanishing beneath the waves of history. Scientists, of course, are skeptical of these grand ideas. They prefer simpler explanations: coincidence, artistic guesswork, or the merging of multiple old maps that accidentally formed something resembling Antarctica. They argue that human imagination, when reconstructing incomplete data, can sometimes create patterns that appear intentional, and that might be true. But even so, the Piri Reis Map's mathematical accuracy remains difficult to brush off. It's not random scribbling. The alignments, distances, and coastal proportions are too coherent, too measured. There's also something poetic about it. The thought that knowledge might not always progress in a straight line. Maybe ancient civilizations knew things we've since forgotten. Maybe progress isn't always about moving forward, but rediscovering what was once lost. The Piri Reis Map feels like a whisper from a forgotten age, a message from a time when the boundaries of the known world stretched far beyond what we believe our ancestors could reach. And here's where it gets even more haunting. When researchers reconstructed the original shape of the map, correcting for the distortions of old projection styles, they found that the southern coastline aligned almost perfectly with the subglacial terrain beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. That terrain wasn't mapped until the 1950s. If the resemblance is more than coincidence, then whoever first charted it had access to knowledge that predates modern civilization by thousands of years. Of course, there's no definitive proof that the Piri Reis Map shows Antarctica. Science demands evidence, and so far, the evidence is circumstantial at best. But what keeps this mystery alive isn't just what we see on the parchment. It's the possibility it represents. Because every time we look at that map, we're reminded that history may not be as linear or as complete as we think. Maybe we've built our understanding of the past on a foundation, missing a few critical pieces. Maybe there were chapters, entire civilizations, erased by time, their discoveries buried beneath ice, ocean, or myth. And once in a while, something like the Piri Reis Map slips through the cracks. A piece of forbidden knowledge that shouldn't exist, yet somehow does. It's just a piece of parchment, stained, worn, and incomplete. But for over 500 years, it has quietly asked one unsettling question. Who really mapped the world before us? The Phoenix Lights, a March 13, 1997. It's just after 8 in the evening over the Arizona desert. The sky is clear, the air is still, and people across the state begin looking up. Not because of fireworks, not because of a storm, but because of something no one could quite explain. It started as a line of lights, bright and perfectly aligned, gliding silently across the night sky. Some said it looked like a boomerang. Others swore it was a massive triangular craft. But whatever it was big, enormous, blocking out the stars as it moved. And the strangest part, it wasn't just one or two people who saw it. It was thousands. They called it the Phoenix Lights, and to this day, it remains one of the most widely witnessed UFO events in modern history. From Nevada to Tucson, from small towns to the heart of Phoenix itself, people watched as this strange formation crossed the sky, slowly, deliberately, almost majestically. Entire neighborhoods stood outside, pointing upward, in complete silence. It wasn't fast like a meteor, and it wasn't loud like an airplane. It was just there, floating, as if observing. Police departments were flooded with calls. News stations scrambled to find answers. Commercial pilots radioed the control tower asking if anything unusual had been picked up on radar. But nothing, no record of a military exercise, no reports of aircraft in the area, and no official explanation that made sense. Witnesses described something massive, miles wide, with a faint glow outlining its structure. Some said they could see the shape blocking the stars as it passed overhead. Others reported that the lights moved in perfect unison, suggesting a single solid craft rather than individual objects. One man said it was so large that when he looked up, it filled his entire field of vision. Another witness said the air went completely silent, as if sound itself had been swallowed. Now, when you hear UFO, your mind jumps to aliens, little green men, spacecraft from beyond the stars. But that night, what made the Phoenix Lights so unsettling wasn't just the idea of extraterrestrial visitors. It was the sheer scale of human uncertainty. This wasn't a single blurry photo or a handful of witnesses. This was an entire city looking at the same thing and realizing that no one, not the police, not the Air Force, not even the governor, had a clue what they were seeing. For months, officials stayed mostly quiet. Then, under growing public pressure, Governor Fife Symington held a press conference. People hoped for answers. Instead, he walked out with a staff member dressed in a cheap alien costume, cracking jokes. The crowd laughed, but it was clear the state wasn't taking the incident seriously. Years later, Symington admitted that he'd seen the lights himself that night, and that, whatever it was not of this world. The government's eventual explanation was underwhelming. They claimed that the lights were flares dropped by Air Force A-10 jets during a training exercise over the Barry Goldwater Range, about 60 miles southwest of Phoenix. But that doesn't line up with what people actually saw. Flares drift. They flicker, they descend, and they disappear behind mountains. The lights that night moved together across hundreds of miles of sky in perfect formation, without any visible descent, for over 2 hours. Even seasoned pilots and astronomers called the explanation weak. It's easy to dismiss UFO sightings as mistakes, misidentified planes, meteors, or optical illusions. But the Phoenix Lights stand apart because of the sheer number and credibility of the witnesses. Military personnel, police officers, doctors, airline pilots, families, all describing the same silent, V-shaped craft moving impossibly slow, without sound, without turbulence, and with an eerie sense of intent. And here's something that deepens the mystery: radar data from that night was inconclusive. Some systems recorded blips that vanished almost instantly, while others detected nothing at all. If the object was solid and miles wide, why didn't radar see it clearly? One theory is that whatever it was using advanced stealth technology, far beyond anything publicly known in 1997. But another, more chilling idea is that it wasn't using technology as we understand it at all. Skeptics, of course, argue that eyewitnesses are notoriously unreliable, that memory can distort, that mass hysteria can make people see patterns where none exist. And sure, human perception is fallible. But when thousands of people describe the same thing at the same time from different angles under clear skies, it's hard to write it off as collective imagination. Even today, many of those witnesses still stand by what they saw. They've been interviewed, documented, analyzed, and their stories remain consistent. A massive, silent craft passing overhead, moving with precision and purpose. Some say they felt a kind of hum, not a sound, but a vibration in their chest. Others described a feeling of awe, even peace, as if whatever they were looking at wasn't threatening, just observing. And maybe that's what makes the Phoenix Lights so haunting. Not just the mystery of what it was, but the idea that something so vast, so advanced, could move through our skies, visible to thousands, and still leave no trace, no crash, no debris, no signal. Just a shared moment of wonder and confusion that refuses to fade. Over the years, the Phoenix Lights have become legend, a cornerstone of modern UFO history. Documentaries have been made, witnesses have written books, and even NASA officials have been asked to weigh in. Yet no one has ever offered a fully satisfying answer. The event sits in that strange space between science and mystery. Undeniable, yet unexplainable. Maybe it was advanced military technology being tested in secret. Maybe it was a natural phenomenon unlike anything we've cataloged. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that we're not the only ones looking up. Whatever those lights were, they didn't just illuminate the Arizona sky that night. They illuminated our curiosity, our fear, and our deep, almost instinctive need to understand what's out there. Because if something that massive can glide above us unnoticed until it decides to reveal itself, what else might be out there, watching from the dark, waiting for the right night to be seen? The moon's hollow theory. It's one of those ideas that sounds like science fiction, until you realize it came from real data. In 1969, during the Apollo 12 mission, NASA astronauts deliberately crashed part of their lunar module onto the moon's surface. They wanted to test the moon's internal structure using seismographs they had left behind. The result: the moon didn't just shake, it rang. For nearly an hour, vibrations echoed through its crust, like a giant bell struck in the dark. Scientists expected a short, sharp tremor, the kind you'd get from solid rock. Instead, they got a sustained resonance. A slow, eerie vibration that faded gradually, as if the moon was hollow. The phrase, "The moon rang like a bell," became one of the most haunting statements in space exploration. And it wasn't a one-time thing. When Apollo 13's third stage rocket accidentally slammed into the moon in 1970, it happened again. The vibrations lasted for over 3 hours. So what does that even mean? Is the moon hollow? Could something that big, a body almost a quarter the size of Earth, actually be empty inside? Let's rewind. The hollow moon theory isn't just some internet myth. It has roots in real scientific anomalies, questions that still don't have easy answers. For one, the moon's density is strangely low. It's about 60% that of Earth, which suggests either it's made of lighter materials or there's less mass inside than expected. When seismographs picked up those long, reverberating waves, some researchers began to wonder if the moon wasn't solid all the way through. Maybe it had massive cavernous pockets, or even a thin shell with an unusually dense core. But here's where things get weird. The moon's origin is still a mystery. The most widely accepted theory, called the giant impact hypothesis, says that billions of years ago, a Mars-sized planet slammed into Earth, blasting debris into orbit that eventually formed the moon. That explains some things, like why lunar rocks share certain isotopes with Earth's crust. But there are problems. Lunar rocks also contain materials that shouldn't have survived such an impact. Their composition is too uniform, and the moon's orbit, its size and distance, are unusually perfect for stabilizing Earth's tilt and controlling our tides. It's almost too perfect. That's why, for decades, scientists and theorists alike have been drawn to the idea that maybe the moon isn't what we think it is. Maybe it's not just a natural satellite. Maybe it's something else. Some of the earliest versions of the hollow moon theory came from Soviet scientists in the 1970s who, after studying its odd behavior, suggested it could be an artificial object, possibly a massive structure with a metallic shell. Their reasoning: the way the moon reflects radar signals, its unusual orbital precision, and those haunting seismic vibrations. Now, most mainstream scientists don't buy the "or artificial" part, at least not officially. The ringing effect, they say, can be explained by the moon's dry, rigid structure. Unlike Earth, which is filled with moisture and molten layers that absorb seismic waves, the moon is bone dry. Its crust and mantle are fractured from billions of meteor impacts, allowing vibrations to bounce and echo instead of dissipating. In other words, it rings not because it's hollow, but because it's brittle. And sure, that makes sense on paper, but the data still doesn't sit perfectly. The way those vibrations propagated through the moon was unlike anything ever recorded on Earth. The waves moved too slowly and lasted too long, suggesting a complex internal structure we still don't fully understand. Even today, with modern sensors and lunar missions, there are unexplained anomalies in how gravity behaves on and around the moon. Tiny deviations called mascons, or mass concentrations, buried beneath the surface. NASA discovered them when early lunar orbiters started dipping unpredictably over certain regions, as if being tugged by invisible weights. What are those mass concentrations? Ancient lava pools, metal cores, or something else entirely? Then there's the moon's behavior itself. Its rotation is locked in perfect synchronization with Earth, meaning we only ever see one side. The near side, the far side, hidden from view, has a crust almost twice as thick. Why? No one's completely sure. The differences in composition between the two sides don't fit neatly into the impact theory. It's as if the moon was constructed in layers, designed for balance. And here's a thought that keeps resurfacing. What if the moon isn't just a remnant of chaos, but a product of intention? Some believe it's a hollow shell that was deliberately placed in orbit long ago, possibly as an observation post, a stabilizing mechanism, or even a kind of cosmic artifact. It sounds far-fetched. But then again, so does the idea of a natural satellite that just happens to perfectly control Earth's tides, shield us from asteroids, and create the rhythm that drives all life on the planet. Still, even if we strip away the wildest ideas, the science alone is strange enough. We've studied the moon for decades, walked on its surface, brought back rocks, and planted our flags. Yet we still don't fully know what's inside it. Every theory leaves new questions behind. Why does it produce such long seismic echoes? Why does its composition differ so sharply from Earth's mantle? And why does it sit at the exact distance needed to create perfect solar eclipses, where the moon and the sun appear the same size in our sky? Coincidence or cosmic precision? The hollow moon theory persists not because people want aliens to be real, but because the data itself feels incomplete, like a riddle missing its final piece. Maybe the ringing wasn't a message, just a natural quirk, but maybe it was a clue, a signal that the moon isn't quite the dead rock we think it is. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: when we crashed our machines into that gray, silent world, it answered back, and in that ringing, deep, cold, and echoing across space, we were reminded that sometimes the universe doesn't just sit quietly waiting to be understood. Sometimes it sings back when you knock. The crystal skulls. They've been called relics of the gods, proof of lost civilizations, even keys to human consciousness itself. Smooth, translucent, and carved with impossible precision, the crystal skulls have fascinated and unsettled researchers for more than a century. They look ancient, weathered, sacred, mysterious. Yet no one can say for sure who made them, how old they really are, or how they were crafted. Because by all known standards of technology, these things shouldn't exist. The first of them appeared in the mid-1800s, surfacing from the jungles of Central America, supposedly unearthed in Mayan ruins, though the details were always vague. Soon, more skulls began to emerge. In Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, even private collections in Europe. Some were the size of a fist, others were life-sized, carved from single blocks of clear quartz crystal. And unlike typical archaeological finds, these weren't rough or chiseled. They were perfect. Their symmetry, polish, and balance suggested craftsmanship on a level we couldn't match even with modern diamond-tipped tools. But here's where the mystery deepens. Quartz crystal is one of the hardest materials on Earth. Even with today's technology, carving something that intricate would take enormous effort. Laser guidance, high-speed diamond saws, precision machinery. Yet these skulls are said to date back thousands of years, to civilizations that had only stone tools. There are no markings of chisels, no evidence of abrasion, and no sign of modern manufacturing techniques. It's as if they were shaped by something beyond the reach of human hands. The most famous of them all is the Mitchell Hedges skull, allegedly discovered in the 1920s in British Honduras, now Belize, by an explorer and his adopted daughter. According to their story, it was found inside a Mayan temple, glinting in the sunlight as if waiting to be uncovered. This skull became the icon of the entire legend, a near-perfect replica of a human head, complete with a removable jaw, all carved from a single piece of quartz. Engineers from Hewlett Packard later studied it and reported something astonishing. There were no visible tool marks, and the carving was oriented against the natural grain of the crystal. That's a recipe for disaster. It should have shattered, but somehow it didn't. So how did ancient people carve something so flawless out of a material so fragile? Some claim the skulls are remnants of an advanced pre-human civilization. Maybe the Maya inherited them. Maybe they were passed down from the lost city of Atlantis. Others say they were left behind by visitors from the stars, their purpose tied to ancient knowledge or energy fields we don't yet understand. In Mayan and Aztec mythology, crystal was associated with divine vision and truth, the ability to see beyond the veil of reality. The skull, symbolizing death and rebirth, might have been more than art. It could have been a kind of technology, a tool for consciousness. That's the spiritual theory, and it's not as fringe as it sounds. People who've handled the skulls often describe strange sensations, humming sounds, electromagnetic pulses, even visions. Modern researchers using energy sensors have detected electromagnetic activity around certain skulls that seems to fluctuate with no clear source. Are they just reacting to static or temperature shifts? Maybe. Or maybe quartz, being piezoelectric, really does respond to energy, storing and amplifying it the way computer chips do today. Think about that for a second. The same material that powers our modern electronics, quartz, was being shaped thousands of years ago into skulls that some believe could hold and transmit information. Could the ancients have known something about the energetic properties of crystal that we're only rediscovering now? Of course, mainstream archaeologists have their doubts. Many of the skulls that surfaced in the 19th and early 20th centuries came from antique dealers, not excavations. Later tests revealed tool marks from modern polishing wheels, suggesting that some, maybe even most, were created in Europe in the 1800s. The British Museum's skull, once believed to be Aztec, turned out to have microscopic scratches consistent with a jeweler's wheel, not a stone chisel. Still, even after those revelations, the mystery doesn't go away, because the Mitchell-Hedges skull, the one that started it all, has never been fully debunked. Its crystal structure and precision defy easy categorization. Some say it's a masterpiece of modern forgery, created before technology that could have made it existed. Others insist it's an authentic artifact, proof that something, or someone, in the deep past had knowledge we've lost. And then there's the legend, the one that keeps the myth alive. It says there are 13 crystal skulls scattered across the earth, each one holding ancient wisdom. When brought together, they will reveal a message to humanity, or perhaps trigger an awakening. No one knows where the story came from, but it echoes across multiple cultures, from Native American oral traditions to South American myths about sacred stones that speak. Whether coincidence or shared memory, the parallels are hard to ignore. But maybe the real power of the crystal skulls isn't in what they do, but in what they represent. They challenge our sense of history. They blur the line between artifact and mystery, science and myth. They remind us that even in a world obsessed with data and proof, there are still things that refuse to fit neatly into the timeline we've built. Because here's the thing, whether carved by human hands, by forgotten technology, or by something we can't yet comprehend, the skulls exist. They're real, tangible, heavy with intention. You can hold one in your hands and feel the cold pulse of the quartz, as if it's storing a secret that's been waiting for centuries. Maybe they're nothing more than beautiful forgeries. Maybe they're relics of a lost civilization, or maybe, just maybe, they're reminders that the boundary between myth and history isn't as solid as we think, and that somewhere in the space between science and mystery, the past is still whispering, through crystal, through silence, through the hollow eyes of a skull that shouldn't exist. The Nazca Lines, from the sky, they look like whispers carved into the desert. Vast shapes of animals, spirals, and lines stretching for miles across the Peruvian plains. But here's the impossible part. You can't see them properly from the ground. The only way to grasp their full form is from above, hundreds of feet in the air. So how did ancient people, 2,000 years ago, design something so massive, so precise, that it still stuns scientists today? That's the mystery of the Nazca Lines. The Nazca civilization, which flourished between roughly 200 BCE and 600 CE, left behind one of the greatest enigmas on Earth, a desert canvas covered in hundreds of geoglyphs. There are straight lines that run perfectly for miles, geometric shapes that never wobble, and giant animals. A hummingbird with outstretched wings, a monkey coiling its tail, a spider stretched across the dust, each one carved by removing a thin layer of reddish stones, revealing the pale sand beneath. The result is a design so precise that even modern surveyors would struggle to replicate it without drones or satellites. At first glance, you might think they're just art, but that's the problem. They're too big to be seen or appreciated from the ground. Some stretch longer than a football field. The hummingbird alone spans over 160 feet. So who were they for? When the first pilots flew over the Nazca Desert in the 1920s, they couldn't believe their eyes. Suddenly, in the middle of nowhere, strange figures appeared beneath their planes. Massive animals, perfect circles, endless lines cutting across the landscape. The discovery sent shockwaves through archaeology. How could a pre-Incan society, with no aerial view, create something that only makes sense from above? Some researchers believed they were messages, offerings to the gods, who were thought to dwell in the heavens. Maybe the Nazca people were trying to communicate with divine beings, asking for rain, fertility, protection. It makes sense when you think about it. The desert is one of the driest places on Earth, a place where life clings by a thread. When you live under that kind of sky, vast, empty, endless, it's easy to see why you might try to reach out to it. But others saw something even stranger. The perfectly straight lines, some stretching over 10 miles, look eerily like runways. And that sparked one of the most controversial theories in archaeology: the ancient astronaut hypothesis. The idea that the Nazca Lines weren't meant for gods at all, but for visitors from the stars. The lines, some believe, were landing markers or navigation signals for alien spacecraft. The figures, animals, humans, geometric shapes, might have been symbols of communication, like giant messages meant to be read from orbit. It sounds wild, and it is, but there are oddities that keep people from dismissing it completely. For example, the precision. Some lines are perfectly straight even across hills and uneven terrain. No ancient surveying tools that we know of could maintain that accuracy over such distances. And yet, the Nazca people somehow did it. Without drones, without GPS, without flight. Archaeologists have tried to decode the mystery using more grounded explanations. Some lines, they say, align with the positions of stars or solstices, functioning as an astronomical calendar. Others point toward sources of underground water, a logical connection in a desert culture dependent on irrigation. In that view, the lines weren't for the gods or aliens, but part of a sacred ritual system linking heaven and earth, sky and survival. And yet, even the scientific explanations don't fully satisfy. Because why such enormous scale? Why make something that only makes sense when viewed from an impossible height? Imagine you're a Nazca artist 2,000 years ago. You don't have plains. You don't even have high hills to climb. But somehow, you and your people plan, measure, and execute massive geometric designs with mathematical precision. To do that, you'd need an advanced understanding of perspective, distance, and geometry, or a way to see from above. Some researchers think they used ropes, wooden stakes, and simple surveying methods to scale up drawings from small models. That could explain some of it. But still, it's almost too perfect, too massive, too coordinated. And then there's the question of time. The desert has preserved the lines for centuries because it almost never rains there. That means these shapes are frozen. Untouched messages from an ancient world. But for what purpose? Some of the figures seem ritualistic, animals linked to fertility, constellations, or myth. Others, like the long intersecting lines, have no clear meaning at all. They just stretch endlessly, like ancient highways leading nowhere. In recent years, scientists using drones and satellites have discovered even more figures hidden under the sand. Hundreds of them, some smaller, some more abstract. It's as if the entire desert was once a giant ritual map, a coded message drawn for eyes that no human could ever possess. One particularly haunting figure is the so-called astronaut. It's a humanoid figure etched on a hillside, with huge eyes and one hand raised as if waving. Was it a deity, a priest, or something else? Its nickname alone tells you how deeply this mystery has seeped into our imagination. Of course, the alien theory remains controversial, mostly rejected by mainstream science. But here's the truth that's harder to ignore, even without invoking extraterrestrials. The Nazca Lines reveal something extraordinary about human beings. They show a civilization capable of thinking on a cosmic scale. People who looked up at the sky and thought, let's draw something the gods can see. They didn't have planes, but they had vision. They didn't have satellites, but they had faith in the heavens. And maybe that's the point. Whether they were calling out to deities, marking the stars, or signaling to someone beyond our world, the Nazca Lines were never meant for us, for the ones walking below. They were meant for the watchers above, whoever or whatever they might have been. Because even now, after centuries of study, we still can't shake the feeling that those endless lines weren't just meant to be seen. They were meant to be read. And somewhere out there, maybe someone already did. The Hessdalen Lights. It's one of those places where the night sky feels alive, where light doesn't just shine, it moves. Deep in a remote valley of central Norway, something strange has been happening for decades. Locals call them the Hessdalen Lights, mysterious glowing orbs that appear out of nowhere, hover silently over the mountains, pulse, dance, and then vanish without a trace. No planes, no satellites, no sound, just balls of light that behave like nothing else in nature. The first modern reports started in the early 1980s, when residents of Hessdalen began seeing bright, floating lights almost every night. Some were white, others yellow or red. They'd drift slowly across the valley, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, changing brightness or splitting into smaller orbs before disappearing. Others would streak across the sky in seconds, faster than any aircraft could move, leaving no trails, no evidence. Over time, hundreds of people, farmers, students, tourists, even scientists, witnessed them. And here's the thing, this isn't just folklore. The Hessdalen Lights have been documented, photographed, measured, recorded on radar, captured on film. It's not a rumor. It's real, and no one can fully explain it. In 1983, a small group of researchers from Norway and Europe launched something called Project Hessdalen. They set up observation posts with cameras, spectrographs, and radar equipment, determined to figure out what these lights were. And what they found only deepened the mystery. The instruments picked up objects, glowing spheres, moving through the sky at speeds over 8,000 meters per second. That's faster than a fighter jet. Yet these lights made no sound, left no sonic booms, and showed no signs of solid structure. Spectrographic analysis revealed that they emitted a continuous light spectrum, not a reflection, not headlights, but self-generated luminosity. In other words, they weren't being lit by anything else. They were glowing from within. So, what could cause something like that? Scientists have proposed dozens of theories. Some say the lights are the result of unusual plasma, electrically charged air created by the unique mineral composition of the valley. The region's rocks contain high levels of zinc and iron, and the valley itself acts like a natural capacitor, building up static electricity until it discharges in glowing bursts. Think of it as a kind of natural neon light, powered by the earth. Others believe it could be a type of combustion caused by dust particles colliding with air molecules. A kind of slow, glowing chemical reaction. But none of those explanations fit every observation. Some lights move too intelligently. They change direction abruptly, hover for minutes, even seem to respond to human presence. There are eyewitness accounts of lights following cars or appearing above researchers' camps right after equipment is set up. That's not random atmospheric discharge. That's behavior. Even stranger, some of the lights appear on radar but not on camera, while others are seen visually but leave no radar signature. It's as if they exist halfway between physical and non-physical. There, but not entirely of this world. And this isn't just a one-off event. The Hessdalen phenomenon has persisted for over 40 years. It doesn't fade with time, doesn't depend on season, and doesn't fit any weather pattern. Locals have learned to live with it. For them, it's almost normal. A quiet, glowing presence that visits their valley again and again. One particularly famous photograph from 1982 shows a bright white sphere hovering over the landscape. The image was analyzed extensively. The light wasn't a flare, wasn't a reflection, and wasn't an airplane. Its shape, intensity, and position all pointed to something that shouldn't have been there. Another case recorded a cluster of 3 lights moving together in perfect formation, accelerating and stopping instantly. No known craft, human or otherwise, can perform that way. In 1998, Project Hessdalen evolved into an automated observatory, a small cabin equipped with cameras and sensors that still monitor the valley 24 hours a day. It's one of the only permanent stations in the world dedicated to studying a recurring UFO-like phenomenon. Data continues to pour in, and while scientists have gathered countless recordings, the why and how remain elusive. Some physicists have tried to frame it in terms of advanced plasma physics, suggesting that the lights could be stable plasma balls held together by electromagnetic fields. similar to ball lightning but far more structured. The problem: ball lightning lasts a few seconds at most. Hessdalen Lights can last for hours, and they return night after night. Then there's the question no one can quite answer: why Hessdalen? Why this one narrow valley? The same mineral composition and atmospheric conditions exist in other places around the world. Yet only here do we see something this consistent, this frequent, this weird. It's no surprise that the phenomenon has drawn comparisons to UFO activity. Some witnesses describe the lights as having distinct shapes, even metallic glints, before they dissolve into brightness. A few have reported electronic interference when the lights appear, like radios cutting out or phones dying. Others claim the lights seem almost aware, hovering near observers, then darting away when approached. It's easy to see why people wonder if these aren't just natural plasma formations, but something else entirely. Still, the most grounded scientists in the project insist there's a physical explanation. They point out that the lights behave differently at different altitudes, suggesting they might be linked to environmental factors we don't yet understand. The way energy interacts between the ground and the air. Some think it could even be a new kind of geophysical phenomenon, something nature does that we simply haven't discovered before. But even if it's natural, that doesn't make it any less mysterious, because nature isn't supposed to produce stable, self-moving balls of light that appear on radar, glide across mountains, and vanish into thin air. Maybe the Hessdalen Lights are the Earth's way of reminding us that we haven't figured everything out yet, that there are still corners of this planet where reality flickers and bends. Maybe it's a kind of natural consciousness, energy-forming patterns we can't yet decode. Or maybe, just maybe, something out there is watching back, not from the stars, but from right here, floating quietly over a lonely Norwegian valley. Whatever they are, they keep returning. They keep glowing. They keep defying explanation. And every time one of those silent orbs lights up the darkness, it's as if the universe whispers a reminder. Not everything strange comes from the sky above. Sometimes the mystery is right here on Earth, waiting to be seen. The dark flow, imagine this: entire clusters of galaxies, trillions of stars, billions of planets, all drifting in the same strange direction, as if being pulled by something no one can see. That's the unsettling reality astronomers stumbled upon when they discovered what's now called the dark flow. It's one of the biggest cosmic mysteries ever found. Not just because it shouldn't be happening, but because it seems to point toward something beyond the edge of our universe itself. It started in 2008, when scientists were analyzing data from NASA's Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe, a satellite designed to map the faint afterglow of the Big Bang. They weren't looking for anything unusual. They were simply tracking the movements of galaxy clusters relative to that ancient radiation, trying to understand how the universe expanded. But what they found didn't make sense. Clusters of galaxies, some hundreds of millions of light years apart, were all moving in the same direction. Not randomly, not scattered, but flowing together, as if being pulled toward a specific region of space. And the velocity, enormous. Up to 600 million miles per hour. This wasn't just gravity between galaxies. It was something far bigger, something outside the observable universe. Normally, the motion of galaxies is explained by the cosmic expansion that began after the Big Bang. Space itself stretches, and galaxies move with that flow. But this was different. The galaxies in the dark flow weren't just expanding with the rest of space. They were all being drawn toward a single point, far beyond what we can see. A region so distant that even light, after 13 billion years, hasn't reached us from there. So what could possibly pull entire clusters of galaxies like that? The leading theory is both mind-blowing and terrifying. Something beyond the edge of our universe is exerting a gravitational influence. Think about that. Something outside the observable cosmos, beyond the veil of space and time, is tugging at galaxies we can see. To understand why that's so strange, you have to know what the observable universe means. It's basically our cosmic horizon, the part of the universe from which light has had time to reach us since the Big Bang, roughly 13.8 billion years ago. Anything beyond that, we can't see it. It's like standing on a beach and looking at the horizon. You know the ocean keeps going, but you can't see past that line. Now imagine something beyond that cosmic horizon, something vast enough, heavy enough, powerful enough, that its gravity still affects everything on this side. That's what the dark flow suggests. Some physicists believe it could be caused by structures beyond our universe, regions of space, time that formed before or alongside our own cosmos. Maybe other universes brushing against ours. If true, it would mean our universe isn't alone. It's part of a multiverse, an ocean of cosmic bubbles, each with its own laws of physics. And maybe one of those bubbles is close enough to pull on ours. Others have proposed something even stranger. The idea that this mysterious pull is a remnant of whatever existed before the Big Bang, that our universe might be expanding out of some larger framework, and that framework still leaves fingerprints on the way galaxies move. There's also a more grounded theory, that maybe it's just a cosmic illusion, a statistical fluke in the data. The problem: the flow keeps showing up in different studies, with different instruments, and over different parts of the sky. It's not going away. In fact, new observations from the Planck satellite have only deepened the debate. While Planck data cast doubt on the original measurements, it didn't completely rule them out. The mystery still lingers, unsolved, unconfirmed, and uncomfortably persistent. To visualize it, imagine our universe as a bubble floating in an infinite sea. Inside the bubble, galaxies drift as space expands. But somewhere out there, another bubble, maybe a bigger one, exerts a gravitational pull. The edge of our universe might not be a wall, but a boundary where two cosmic bubbles brush together. The dark flow could be the ripple from that collision, a faint tug left over from when universes touched. It's hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about movement on a scale beyond imagination. Galaxy clusters the size of supercontinents, all sliding toward an unseen abyss. And yet, here on our tiny planet, we can detect it, with radio telescopes, with mathematics, with tiny variations in the microwave background radiation, echoes of something far beyond human comprehension. If the dark flow is real, it changes everything we think we know about the universe. It suggests that what we call everything might only be a fraction of reality. That beyond our cosmic horizon, there could be vast regions of space, maybe even entire other universes, pulling on us like ghosts in the dark. And here's what makes it so unnerving. We'll never be able to see what's causing it. The edge of the observable universe isn't just a distance problem. It's a barrier of time itself. Anything beyond it exists in a realm we can't touch, can't observe, can't ever visit. We can feel its influence, but not its presence. It's the ultimate shadow, something real enough to move galaxies, but invisible to every telescope in existence. Maybe the dark flow is a sign that our universe is part of something much larger, a cosmic web of realities stretching into infinity. Or maybe it's something even more incomprehensible, a flaw in the structure of space, time itself, a sign that the fabric of the universe is being pulled apart from the outside. Whatever it is, it forces us to confront an idea that science rarely touches, that maybe we'll never have all the answers. Maybe there really are forces beyond the edge of understanding, shaping our reality from the darkness beyond. So the next time you look up at the stars, remember this: everything you see, every galaxy, every planet, every shining point of light is moving. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of light itself, something is pulling them all in one impossible direction. Something we can't see, something we can't name, something that reminds us how little we truly know about the vast, unseen heart of the cosmos. The missing link? It's one of the oldest questions we've ever asked. Where exactly did we come from? Somewhere between the apes that roamed ancient forests and the humans who built cities and dreamed of gods, there's supposed to be a bridge. The missing link. But after more than a century of digging through bones and decoding DNA, that bridge still isn't clear. Every time scientists think they've found the answer, the evidence twists into something even stranger. The story starts in the mid-1800s, when Charles Darwin proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection. It shook the world, the idea that humans weren't created all at once, but had evolved over millions of years from earlier species. But Darwin himself admitted there was a problem. The fossil record at the time didn't show a clear transition between ancient apes and modern humans. There was a gap, a missing link that should have existed but hadn't been found, so began one of science's greatest hunts. In 1891, a Dutch anatomist named Eugene Dubois uncovered skull fragments and a femur in Java, what he called Pithecanthropus erectus, or Java man. It looked human but not quite. A smaller brain, thick brow ridges, long arms. It was hailed as the missing link. But then came other discoveries. Peking man in China, Australopithecus in Africa, Lucy in Ethiopia. Each one fit the puzzle differently. Some looked more ape, like some more human. None of them were the link. Instead, it turned out the story wasn't a straight line at all. It was a tangled tree with branches that kept crossing and disappearing. The deeper scientists dug, the more confusing it got. There wasn't just one missing link. There were dozens of them. Whole species of early humans we never knew existed. Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, Denisovans, and more. Some used tools, some buried their dead, some lived side by side with modern humans. And that's where things start to feel eerie. Because for thousands of years, we weren't alone. Imagine that, around 50,000 years ago, there were multiple types of humans walking the earth. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, Homo floresiensis in Indonesia, and Homo sapiens, us, spreading out of Africa. We didn't just replace them overnight. We met them. We traded with them. We even had children with them. That means a part of you, maybe 1 or 2% of your DNA, might still belong to another species entirely. The missing link might not just be ancient bones buried in stone. It might be living inside us. But even with genetic evidence, the question remains: what made us different? Why did our branch of the tree survive when all the others vanished? Some scientists say it was language. the ability to share complex ideas, plan, and imagine things that didn't exist. Others believe it was cooperation, or symbolic thought, or even our relationship with fire. Whatever it was, something happened, something that gave Homo sapiens an advantage no other species could match. One moment we were crafting tools and painting cave walls. The next, we were building civilizations and shaping the planet itself. That leap, from animal to self-aware being, is the biggest mystery of all, and it's not just about fossils or bones. It's about consciousness. How did awareness, thought, memory, identity emerge from raw biology? Evolution can explain the body, but the mind, that's still a mystery even neuroscience can't fully solve. Maybe the missing link isn't physical at all. Maybe it's something invisible, the spark that turned survival into meaning. There are also discoveries that don't fit neatly into the evolutionary timeline. Fossils that seem too old, artifacts that seem too advanced, footprints that suggest modern humans existed far earlier than we thought. Most get dismissed as errors or anomalies, but each one adds another crack to the clean, linear story we tell about ourselves. For example, in 1976, researchers found footprints in Tanzania's Latoli volcanic ash, perfectly preserved impressions left by ancient beings walking upright almost 4 million years ago. That's before Homo sapiens existed. So who were they? Their stride was human-like, their posture balanced. It forced scientists to rethink everything about when and how bipedalism, walking on two legs, evolved. Then there's Homo naledi, discovered in South Africa in 2013. A small-brained species, barely 5 feet tall, yet they seem to perform ritual burials, something only intelligent humans were supposed to do. It's as if nature was experimenting, creating multiple versions of humanity, some that burned bright for a moment and then vanished, leaving only hints behind. But here's the twist: the more evidence we find, the less certain the story becomes. Evolution didn't move in a straight line from ape to man. It was messy, chaotic, and filled with dead ends. We didn't climb a ladder. We survived a storm. And that's where the idea of the missing link takes on a deeper meaning. Maybe it isn't a single fossil waiting to be found. Maybe it's a symbol of everything we still don't understand. The transition between instinct and imagination, between surviving and wondering why we exist at all. Some scientists have even proposed that evolution may not be entirely random, that there might be unknown forces or patterns guiding complexity, nudging matter toward consciousness. It's a controversial idea, but it touches something profound. Maybe the story of human origins isn't just biological. Maybe it's cosmic. So what if the missing link isn't missing at all? What if it's us, the bridge between what we were and what we're still becoming? We keep searching ancient bones for proof of where we came from, but maybe the answer has been staring back at us in the mirror all along. Because in the end, the mystery of human evolution isn't about what we lost. It's about what we found: awareness, curiosity, and the need to ask these questions in the first place. The missing link might not be a fossil buried in the ground. It might be the unexplainable moment when life began to look up at the stars and wonder where it came from, and why it was here at all. The Taos Hum, it starts as a low vibration, not loud, not sharp, but deep. A faint, constant hum that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. In the quiet desert town of Taos, New Mexico, people have been hearing it for decades. A strange, low-frequency sound that no one can trace, measure, or fully explain. It's not a myth. It's not in people's heads. At least, not entirely. The Taos Hum is real, and it's one of the strangest modern mysteries still baffling science. The story began in the early 1990s when residents of Taos started reporting a persistent droning noise that seemed to hang in the air. It wasn't like a truck idling or machinery running. It was softer, deeper, almost felt more than heard. It rattled windows, vibrated in the chest, and for some, drove them nearly mad. The weirdest part: not everyone could hear it. Maybe 2% of the local population said they could. The rest heard nothing at all. Yet the people who did were absolutely certain it was there. The hum wasn't constant in pitch or strength. Some described it as a throbbing bass note, others as a faint engine running far off in the distance. It would appear suddenly, then vanish without warning. People moved houses, changed cars, unplugged appliances, even tried sleeping underground. But the sound followed them. Some heard it indoors, others outdoors. Some said it got louder at night. And no matter what anyone tried, no one could pinpoint a source. The phenomenon became so notorious that in 1993, the U.S. Congress actually commissioned an investigation. Scientists from Los Alamos National Laboratory, the University of New Mexico, and Sandia National Laboratories descended on Taos with sensitive microphones and vibration detectors. They tested everything: air pressure, ground tremors, radio waves, even the frequencies emitted by local power lines. But after weeks of research, they came up with nothing. The instruments picked up no consistent low-frequency sound matching what people described. The hum existed only to those who could hear it. It wasn't showing up on any physical measurement. And yet, the complaints kept coming. That's when theories started to multiply. Some believed it was industrial, perhaps low-frequency radio transmissions or underground military experiments. Others suspected nearby communication towers or electrical substations. Still others claimed it might be the Earth itself, a kind of natural resonance produced by seismic waves or shifting tectonic plates. Then came the psychological theories, that the hum was a form of auditory sensitivity or even a mass perceptual phenomenon. But here's the thing: similar hums have been reported all over the world: in Bristol, England, in Windsor, Ontario, in Auckland, New Zealand, and across the American Southwest. In every case, only a small percentage of people can hear it, and the frequency sits in the same range, between 30 and 80 hertz, right at the edge of human hearing. That consistency is hard to dismiss as coincidence. So what's really happening? One scientific explanation involves something called low-frequency standing waves, invisible vibrations that can form when sound waves bounce and reinforce each other over long distances. These can sometimes be produced by natural wind patterns, distant machinery, or even the ocean's microseisms. Subtle vibrations generated by waves crashing far away. The human ear can't always detect them consciously, but some people are more sensitive to these frequencies, which could explain why only a few hear the hum. Another possibility is electromagnetic hypersensitivity, a controversial condition in which certain people claim to feel or hear electromagnetic fields from modern electronics. While not officially recognized as a medical diagnosis, it's been linked to reports of headaches, anxiety, and, yes, low hums that others can't perceive. But here's what makes the Taos hum truly bizarre. Even when all power in the region was temporarily shut down for testing, some people said they could still hear it. No engines, no transmissions, no human-made sounds, and yet the hum remained. That led a few researchers to consider an even stranger theory, that the sound might not be external at all, but internal. The human body itself can produce tones and vibrations, especially when something goes wrong with the auditory system. A small number of people suffer from spontaneous otoacoustic emissions, faint sounds generated by their own inner ear. Normally, we don't notice them. But in rare cases, the brain amplifies those signals, creating what feels like an external hum that's actually coming from inside. Except in Taos, it's not just one or two people. It's dozens, and they all describe hearing the same thing in the same place. That's not just a medical anomaly. That's a pattern. Over the years, the mystery has turned Taos into a kind of acoustic pilgrimage site. Sound engineers, paranormal investigators, and curious tourists have all shown up, hoping to hear the infamous tone. Some spend nights in the desert listening for it. A few claim they finally do. A faint, rhythmic thrum just below the edge of consciousness, like the earth quietly humming to itself. Others hear nothing at all and leave more confused than when they arrived. There are even spiritual interpretations, that the hum is the voice of the planet, a resonance of energy beneath the surface, or a signal of consciousness itself. Some native elders in the region have said that the earth has always had a sound, and the hum is simply the modern world finally noticing it. It's easy to dismiss the Taos hum as imagination or misperception, but there's something unsettling about how persistent it is, how it continues to be reported even decades later. If it were purely psychological, why would it cluster so tightly in specific places with such consistent descriptions? Maybe it's both, part natural, part human, part something we don't yet understand. Sound is a physical thing, but it's also deeply personal. It's vibration meeting biology, and sometimes those two worlds overlap in ways science can't yet measure. So maybe the Taos hum isn't just a sound. Maybe it's a threshold, a reminder that even silence isn't really silent, that the world is always humming with energy, movement, and mystery, whether we can hear it or not. And maybe, just maybe, the ones who can hear it aren't cursed at all. Maybe they're simply tuned to a frequency the rest of us have forgotten how to listen for. The Pioneer Anomaly. It began quietly. Two small spacecraft launched in the early 70s, heading into the unknown. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 were simple by today's standards, built with barely enough computing power to run a modern calculator. But their mission was extraordinary: to explore the outer planets and then keep going, out of the solar system, into interstellar space. Everything worked perfectly, until something started to go wrong. Something subtle, almost invisible at first. A tiny, steady pull that no one could explain. It was called the Pioneer Anomaly. When NASA began analyzing the data from these two probes decades later, they noticed something strange. The spacecraft weren't exactly where they were supposed to be. According to Newton's laws and Einstein's equations, their paths could be predicted with near perfect precision. Yet both probes were slowing down, ever so slightly, as if something out there were tugging on them. Not enough to cause alarm, but enough to break physics. The deceleration was incredibly small, about 8.7 times 10 to the negative 10 meters per second squared. That's a fraction of a fraction, almost microscopic. But in space, even the tiniest deviation means everything. Over millions of miles, that gentle pull added up, dragging the pioneers off their expected trajectories. And when you're navigating $1 billion spacecraft across the solar system, teeny isn't small enough to ignore. So NASA did what NASA does best. They investigated. Teams of scientists spent years checking every possible cause. Could it be gravity from unknown objects? A cloud of dark matter? Errors in the tracking data? None of it fit. The pull was consistent, precise, and eerily constant, as if some invisible hand was slowing the spacecraft as they drifted farther from the sun. And that's where things got weird. The Pioneer Anomaly wasn't just a technical hiccup. It hinted that something fundamental about our understanding of motion and gravity might be missing. Because if these tiny probes, obeying all known physics, were still being affected by an unknown force, then maybe space itself wasn't behaving the way we thought it did. At first, some physicists suggested new laws of gravity. Maybe Newton's formula broke down at the edge of the solar system. Others speculated it was dark matter, the mysterious substance that makes up most of the universe's mass but can't be seen. A few even proposed exotic explanations: modified inertia, quantum drag, or the influence of higher dimensions. But the simplest answer, and the one that would take decades to confirm, was almost too mundane to believe. You see, the pioneers weren't powered by solar panels like later spacecraft. They used small nuclear generators, radioisotope thermoelectric generators, that converted heat from decaying plutonium into electricity. That heat didn't just radiate out evenly. Some of it bounced off the spacecraft structure, off the antennas, off the body panels, and created a faint but constant push in the opposite direction. It was the cosmic version of a slow, invisible recoil. In other words, the spacecraft weren't being pulled backward. They were being pushed ever so slightly by their own warmth. It sounds almost anticlimactic. Years of speculation boiled down to nothing more than heat. But the truth is, that answer isn't disappointing. It's incredible. It shows how finely tuned our measurements have become, that we can detect the force of a few photons of infrared radiation across billions of miles of space. It's like noticing a candle flickering on the moon and realizing it's affecting the tides. But even with the thermal explanation, the Pioneer Anomaly remains symbolic of something bigger: the edges of human understanding. For more than 30 years, the world's best minds tried to solve a riddle written in the numbers, and in doing so, they showed how fragile and amazing our grasp of the universe really is. Because for a while there, we truly thought we might have discovered new physics. Still, not everyone was satisfied. Some researchers pointed out that the thermal recoil model doesn't perfectly account for every data point, that the timing and magnitude of the anomaly varied slightly between Pioneer 10 and 11. Others wondered whether the effect might mask something deeper, perhaps subtle gravitational effects from the sun's mass distribution, or even interactions with the fabric of space, time itself. Think about it. These probes were humanity's first true explorers of interstellar space, tiny ambassadors drifting beyond the reach of the planets. They carried plaques with messages and drawings of humans, just in case someone, or something, found them. They were designed to vanish quietly into the dark. Yet even as they disappeared, they whispered back a mystery that shook our confidence in the rules of nature. When you zoom out, the story of the Pioneer Anomaly isn't about a force we couldn't find. It's about the humility of science, how even the smallest data glitch can make us question everything. For years, it stood as a cosmic ghost, a reminder that the universe doesn't always behave the way our equations expect. And even now, with what seems like an answer, there's still a faint echo of wonder. Because if a little warmth from an old spacecraft can bend our understanding of physics, what else might be out there, hidden in the noise, waiting to remind us that we've only just begun to understand the universe we're moving through? Maybe the Pioneer Anomaly wasn't a sign of new physics, but for a moment, it made us look again, deeper, more carefully, at the forces guiding everything, from spacecraft to galaxies. It reminded us that space isn't empty, and that even in the silence between stars, there's motion, there's mystery, and there's meaning. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. Others show us how to listen better. The Pioneer Anomaly did both, and as those tiny probes keep drifting farther into the dark, their faint signal, now too weak to reach us, still carries the echo of that impossible question: what if the universe isn't done surprising us yet? Fast radio burst. It started with a blip, a single millisecond burst of radio energy that appeared out of nowhere, hit our telescopes, and vanished before anyone knew what it was. It came from deep space, billions of light years away, but it didn't behave like any known cosmic event. That first flash happened in 2007, and it shouldn't have existed. Scientists called it a fast radio burst, or FRB. At the time, no one realized they had just stumbled onto one of the most baffling phenomena in modern astronomy. Powerful signals from the edge of the universe that seemed to defy every rule we know. The signal was discovered accidentally. Astronomer Duncan Lorimer and his student were analyzing old data from a telescope in Australia when they found a spike, a single pulse of radio energy lasting less than a blink. It was so bright that it couldn't have come from anything nearby. To generate that kind of power, something had to release more energy in a few milliseconds than the sun emits in an entire day. But when they checked again, it was gone. No object, no explosion, no afterglow, just silence. At first, no one believed it. It had to be interference, a glitch, maybe from Earth or a satellite. But then it happened again. Different telescopes, different directions, all picking up similar bursts, random, unpredictable, but each one carrying a distinct signature that showed they came from deep space. And that's when the question hit: what could possibly produce a signal like that? We're talking about radio waves. Invisible light, the kind our phones and Wi-Fi use. But these were coming from billions of light years away, arriving with perfect timing, as if something or someone had sent them. Some scientists joked that maybe they were alien beacons, interstellar Morse code. Others laughed, until they realized how little else made sense. The early theories came fast. Some said they were the result of colliding neutron stars, the incredibly dense cores left after supernova explosions. Others proposed magnetars, neutron stars with magnetic fields so intense they could rip atoms apart. Those events could, in theory, produce powerful bursts of radio energy. The problem: most of them would be one-time catastrophes. But then, in 2016, something happened that flipped the entire conversation upside down. Astronomers found a repeating FRB. This one didn't just go off once. It pulsed again and again, from the same location, months apart, like a cosmic heartbeat. That single discovery shattered the idea that FRBs were all caused by one-time collisions. Something out there was generating these bursts on purpose, or at least with some kind of pattern. And that's when things got even weirder. As more telescopes joined the search, the signals began to multiply. Hundreds of FRBs were detected, and soon thousands. Some repeat in clusters, others are completely random. Some show circular polarization, a twisting pattern in their waves, as if passing through intense magnetic fields. Others shift in frequency, as if being warped by plasma. Each one tells a slightly different story, but none of them add up to a single, neat explanation. There's a reason scientists call FRBs the cosmic wildcards. Their energy is immense, their origins unknown, and they don't behave consistently. Some come from small dwarf galaxies, others from massive spirals. Some burst once and never again. Some repeat dozens of times and then go quiet for years. It's as if the universe is sending signals we only catch snippets of, and every time we tune in, the message changes. And here's the kicker. We've caught them live now. In 2020, an FRB was detected from inside our own galaxy, the Milky Way. That one came from a known magnetar called SGR 1935-2154. It proved that at least some FRBs can come from magnetars, but not all of them, because even that one didn't behave exactly like the extragalactic bursts we've seen before. The energy, duration, and pattern were all slightly off. It's as if nature keeps giving us the answer, but never the same one twice. That's led to some wild speculation. Could FRBs be signals from advanced civilizations? Not necessarily communication, but byproducts, like the energy leakage of massive interstellar technologies, something beyond our imagination. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb even suggested they could be propulsion systems, beams used to push spacecraft across galaxies. It sounds like science fiction, but so did black holes once. But here's what makes FRBs so unsettling. They're not rare. They happen thousands of times a day across the universe. Bursts of energy that light up the cosmos for a fraction of a second, and then disappear. We only catch a few because most go off in places we're not looking. The sky is basically flickering with signals we can't predict, can't trace, and can barely study before they vanish. Think about that. The universe is alive with invisible lightning, and we've only just learned how to hear it. When scientists talk about FRBs, there's always a mix of awe and frustration, because we know just enough to realize how little we understand. They're too short to analyze in detail, too random to anticipate, and too powerful to ignore. Every new discovery seems to solve one question and open 5 more. Some FRBs even seem to follow strange patterns, bursts repeating on cycles, as if ticking like clocks. One, detected in 2020, showed a 16-day rhythm, 4 days of activity, 12 days of silence, over and over again. That kind of precision doesn't just happen by accident. It suggests some kind of orbital motion, or internal mechanism, or, as some whisper, something intelligent. Of course, science stays cautious. The leading theory is still that most FRBs come from magnetars, the hyper-magnetic remnants of dead stars that occasionally snap and release monstrous energy. But even that explanation doesn't account for all of them. A few are too bright, too structured, or too repetitive. As one astronomer put it, FRBs are like fingerprints from the universe. Every one is unique. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they're not a single phenomenon at all, but a cosmic language written in energy, with multiple sources speaking at once. Some natural, some maybe not. Whatever they are, FRBs remind us that we're still listening to the universe with infant ears. We built telescopes expecting silence, and instead, we found a sky full of whispers. Brief, brilliant shouts from billions of light years away, carrying messages we don't yet understand. And if you think that sounds poetic, remember this: every time one of those bursts hits Earth, it momentarily outshines entire galaxies. For a millisecond, all that power, all that mystery, passes right through us, and then it's gone. Maybe one day we'll decode them. Maybe we'll learn they're just the natural pulse of creation. Or maybe, just maybe, they're the universe trying to tell us something. And we're only now learning how to listen. Time slips. It always starts the same way. A normal moment, an ordinary day. Someone's walking down a familiar street, turning a corner they've walked 100 times before, and suddenly, the world has changed. The cars are gone. The people are dressed differently. The air feels heavier, quieter. Then, just as suddenly, everything snaps back. And they're left wondering what just happened. No dream, no drugs, no hallucination. Just a brief, impossible visit to another time. These stories are called time slips. Moments when people claim they've accidentally stepped into the past. If it sounds like fiction, you're not alone. But what makes time slips so haunting is that the people who experience them don't act like storytellers. They act like witnesses. Their memories are vivid, consistent, and often shared by more than one person. They remember smells, sounds, details that no one could easily make up. And the strangest part, sometimes what they describe later turns out to match real places and events from decades or even centuries ago. One of the most famous time slip cases happened in 1901. Two English women, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jordan, were visiting the Palace of Versailles in France. They were professors, educated, skeptical. The last people you'd expect to fall for anything strange. But as they walked through the gardens, they noticed something felt wrong. The light looked unnatural, flat, and still. The people around them seemed out of place, dressed in powdered wigs and 18th century clothing. They even saw a woman sketching on the grass who looked eerily familiar. Later, when they described the experience, they realized the woman matched portraits of Marie Antoinette. Historical records later confirmed that the area they'd been walking through was part of where the Queen had been seen before her arrest during the French Revolution. To this day, their account, known as the Moberly Jourdain incident, is considered one of the most detailed time slip reports ever recorded. But it didn't stop there. Similar stories have surfaced all over the world. In 1996, a man named Frank was driving through Liverpool when he turned a corner and found himself in a street full of 1950s shopfronts. The cars were gone. The signs were old-fashioned, and people were wearing clothes from another era. He thought it was a movie set, until he realized the shops matched historical records of real businesses that hadn't existed in decades. Then, as suddenly as it began, he turned another corner and was back in the present. There's also the story of a couple in Spain who stopped their car on a quiet road and suddenly found themselves surrounded by an unfamiliar landscape. Different trees, no power lines, and a farmhouse where none should be. When they tried to approach, the scenery seemed to blur and then vanish, leaving them exactly where they had started. Skeptics say time slips are just tricks of the brain, a mix of déjà vu, dissociation, or memory glitches. But if that's true, how do we explain when two or more people experience the same thing at the same time? Shared hallucinations are almost unheard of. Some psychologists believe time slips might be related to what's called temporal lobe transients, brief electrical misfires in the part of the brain that handles time perception. These can distort a person's sense of reality so powerfully that minutes can feel like centuries. That might explain why a momentary glitch could feel like being dropped into another era. But there's another theory, one that doesn't just look at the brain, but at time itself. Einstein once described time as a dimension, not a straight line. More like a landscape where past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. What we experience as the flow of time might just be our mind moving through that landscape one moment at a time. If that's true, then under certain conditions, maybe specific electromagnetic fields, gravitational shifts, or even mental states, that barrier could blur. What if time slips are those moments when 2 points in that landscape momentarily overlap? It sounds wild, but physics actually leaves the door open. There's a concept called closed time, like curves, paths in space, time that loop back on themselves. They're theoretical, but they appear naturally in Einstein's equations. In extreme conditions, like near-rotating black holes, time could literally fold, allowing moments from the past to touch the present. Now imagine if small, local distortions of that kind could happen right here on Earth, triggered by geological or electromagnetic anomalies. Interestingly, many reported time slips occur in places with strong geological activity, fault lines, underground water, or magnetic minerals, all things known to affect the electromagnetic field. The Palace of Versailles, for instance, sits atop a region of complex underground structures and historic resonance patterns. Coincidence? Maybe. But maybe those conditions act like a recording device, storing energy from the past and occasionally replaying it. Not as a ghost, but as a literal time echo. There's another layer to this: consciousness. Some theorists believe human perception doesn't just observe time, it anchors it. So if the brain's rhythm slips, due to emotion, trauma, or environmental influence, maybe it can momentarily tune into another frequency of time, just like tuning a radio between stations. That could explain why time slips often happen during emotionally charged moments or in places soaked with history. But there's something else, something quieter and harder to dismiss: the emotional truth people carry after these experiences. Many say they felt calm, not scared. Some describe a deep sense of nostalgia or peace, like they'd touched something sacred. They don't sound like attention seekers. They sound like people who glimpsed a hidden layer of reality and came back changed. And maybe that's the real point of time slips. Not proof that time travel exists, but a reminder that time isn't as rigid as we think. We live inside it, yet barely understand how it moves around us. We measure it, chase it, waste it. But maybe, just maybe, it sometimes slips and lets us peek behind the curtain. So next time you're walking through an old street, or standing somewhere heavy with history, and you feel that strange stillness in the air, the kind that makes sound seem distant and light feel wrong, maybe don't dismiss it too quickly. Maybe it's not just déjà vu. Maybe, for a heartbeat, time is bending. Maybe you're standing in 2 centuries at once. Because if even one of these stories is real, then time isn't just something that passes. It's something alive, something that occasionally looks back. The Yonaguni Monument. It's one of those discoveries that forces you to question everything you think you know about history. Off the coast of Yonaguni, a small island at the southern tip of Japan, divers stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist. A massive stone structure deep beneath the sea, carved with sharp angles, staircases, terraces, and what looks like the outline of a pyramid. It's so precise, so deliberate, that it doesn't look like nature's work. But if humans built it, that would mean an advanced civilization existed thousands of years earlier than any we've recorded. That's the riddle of the Yonaguni Monument. Japan's Atlantis, hiding quietly beneath the waves. The story began in 1986, when a local diver named Kiichiro Aratake was exploring the Seabed near Yonaguni. He was looking for hammerhead sharks, not history. But as he swam deeper, something caught his eye. A massive rock formation rising from the sea floor, 80 feet below the surface. It wasn't random. The edges were too sharp, the lines too clean. Giant platforms stepped upward like a ziggurat. Some surfaces were polished flat. There were right angles, pathways, even what looked like a staircase leading upward into the blue. At first, everyone assumed it was a natural formation. After all, the ocean carves strange shapes all the time: erosion, tectonic shifts, sediment. But when archaeologists and geologists came to inspect it, the mystery deepened. The monument measured more than 500 feet long and 250 feet wide, about the size of a small city block. And while some parts could be explained by geology, others couldn't. There were what looked like columns, corridors, doorways, and even a large open area resembling a plaza. Some divers even claimed to see carvings, faint, weathered symbols etched into the stone. If the monument really was man-made, it would completely rewrite human history. That's because the site now lies far below sea level, meaning it would have been built before the last ice age ended, more than 10,000 years ago, when sea levels were roughly 400 feet lower. At that time, human civilization, as we currently understand it, didn't exist. There were hunter-gatherers, small tribes, but not massive stone architects capable of sculpting an underwater city. So if Yonaguni was carved by humans, it suggests that an advanced, forgotten culture thrived in Asia thousands of years before the rise of Egypt or Sumer. That possibility sparked both fascination and outrage in the scientific community. One side, led by marine geologist Dr. Masaki Kimura from the University of the Ryukyus, insists that Yonaguni is a genuine archaeological site, the remains of an ancient civilization lost when rising seas swallowed their world. Kimura mapped the formation for years, identifying what he believed were temples, roads, stairways, and even a massive pyramid-like structure. He even claimed to find tools and stone artifacts nearby, hinting that humans once lived there. But other scientists argue the opposite. Geologist Robert Schoch, famous for his research on the Great Sphinx's erosion patterns, visited Yonaguni and concluded it was mostly natural. He pointed to the type of rock, sandstone, which fractures easily into sharp, rectangular blocks through a process called jointing. In other words, nature itself can carve perfect-looking steps and terraces when exposed to water and pressure over time. To him, the monument wasn't a city. It was a coincidence. Yet even Schoch admitted something curious. Some sections looked too organized to dismiss entirely. He suggested that maybe, just maybe, early humans enhanced or modified a natural formation for their own use, turning it into a ceremonial site. That idea sits on the border between science and mystery. Not pure nature, not pure design, but something in between. And then there's the question no one can answer: if this was man-made, who built it? There's no record, no mythology, no ancient texts describing a civilization like this in the region. The Okinawan Islands do have myths about a lost land called Mu, a legendary Pacific civilization said to have vanished beneath the sea. Western explorers later compared it to Atlantis, the fabled advanced society Plato described as swallowed by the ocean. Could Yonaguni be a remnant of that myth made real? Skeptics roll their eyes, but myths often carry fragments of truth. Think about it. Stories of great floods appear in nearly every ancient culture: Mesopotamia, India, Mesoamerica, and Japan. Maybe they weren't just metaphors. Maybe they were memories. Whispers from a time when rising seas erased entire worlds. The divers who've explored Yonaguni describe it as haunting. Visibility underwater shifts constantly. One moment the monument looks like a perfect pyramid. The next it's just a wall of stone fading into the dark. You can swim through narrow corridors that suddenly open into massive chambers. There's a sense of order, of geometry, that nature rarely achieves on its own. And when you realize this vast structure has been sitting there, hidden beneath the ocean for thousands of years, you start to feel small, like you've stumbled onto something humanity was never meant to forget. Even if it's natural, Yonaguni still raises unsettling questions, because whether by human hands or by Earth itself, it's a mirror of intelligence, geometry born from chaos. It sits exactly where ancient myths say lost civilizations once stood. It reminds us that our planet has erased more than we'll ever recover. Cities, cultures, knowledge, all gone under the waves, waiting for rediscovery. And maybe that's the real power of the Yonaguni Monument. It forces us to admit how fragile our understanding of history really is. We think we know the timeline: hunter, gatherers, then farmers, then cities. But the ocean hides secrets that could tear that story wide open. So the next time someone tells you that civilization began 6,000 years ago, remember what lies beneath Yonaguni's waters. Vast terraces, impossible symmetry, and silence. Maybe nature carved it. Or maybe, long before written history, someone else did. Someone whose world ended when the seas rose, leaving only stone behind to whisper their story. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't erode with time. It just sinks a little too deep for us to see. Spontaneous human combustion. Imagine this. A fire so selective it defies logic. A person burns to ash, yet the chair they sat on remains untouched. No accelerant, no heat source, no sign of struggle. Just a pile of fine, gray ash where a human body once was. It's called spontaneous human combustion, and for centuries it's been one of the strangest, most unsettling mysteries in the study of death. People don't just burst into flames. And yet, over and over again, history insists that sometimes they do. The earliest known case dates back to the 1600s, when an Italian knight named Polonius Vorstius was said to have burst into fire after drinking wine. Witnesses claimed his body ignited suddenly, leaving nothing but smoke and bone fragments. It sounded like folklore, until more cases followed. By the 1700s, there were documented reports in France, England, and Germany of people found burned almost entirely to ash while their surroundings showed little or no damage. One of the most infamous happened in 1951 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Mary Reiser, a 67-year-old woman, was found reduced to ash in her apartment. The room itself was barely touched. A few soot marks, a melted light switch, and the remains of one foot still wearing a slipper. The police were baffled. The fire hadn't spread, yet her body had been incinerated at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to destroy bones completely. How could such heat exist without consuming the rest of the room? When investigators consulted fire experts, they were met with silence and speculation. Some claimed a dropped cigarette might have caused her clothing to ignite. But that didn't explain the intensity of the burn. Others proposed what's known as the wick effect, the idea that once a person's clothing catches fire, body fat melts and acts as a slow, burning fuel, turning the person into a kind of human candle. It sounds horrifying, but it's one of the few theories that can partially explain why only the body burns and not the surroundings. In 1998, British scientists even conducted a controlled experiment using a pig carcass wrapped in cloth to simulate the wick effect. It burned slowly and intensely, reducing the flesh to ash while leaving much of the environment intact. For skeptics, that was case closed. But here's the problem. The wick effect requires an external ignition source. Something has to start the fire. So that still leaves the central question, what lights the match? And that's where science runs out of comfortable answers. Over the centuries, theories have ranged from electrical discharges inside the body to static buildup, to bursts of methane gas from the intestines that somehow ignite. Some have even suggested that certain chemical reactions, perhaps triggered by diet or alcohol, could create flammable compounds under the skin. Others look toward more exotic explanations: ball lightning, geomagnetic fields, or even spontaneous plasma discharges caused by fluctuations in atmospheric energy. But what unsettles researchers most are the cases that simply don't fit any model. Take the story of Jack Angel, a traveling salesman from Georgia. In 1974, he went to sleep in his motorhome and woke up with his arms severely burned, not from the outside, but from the inside out. There was no sign of fire anywhere in the room. Doctors said the tissue damage resembled electrical burns, yet no current had passed through his body. He survived, but no one could explain what happened. Then there's the case of Dr. John Irving Bentley, a respected physician from Pennsylvania. In 1966, he was found dead in his bathroom, reduced mostly to ash. The only intact part of him was his lower leg, still inside a slipper. Just like Mary Reeser, the rest of his body had vanished into a pile of gray powder, and the surrounding area showed only a small patch of scorch marks. It was as if fire had targeted him and him alone. Skeptics point out that spontaneous human combustion might not be spontaneous at all. That in every case, there's probably an overlooked source of ignition. Maybe a dropped cigarette, maybe a spark from an electrical outlet. But that explanation doesn't sit well with people who've studied the pattern. These fires behave in a way no normal flame should. They burn downward, not outward. They stay contained, focused entirely on the human body. That's not how fire works, unless something about the body itself is fueling it. Which brings us to the most bizarre question of all. Could the human body generate its own ignition? Some researchers have suggested biochemical imbalances might cause pockets of flammable gases or vapors inside the body. Under certain rare conditions, static discharge or electrochemical reactions could ignite those gases. It sounds absurd, but remember, the body is a walking power plant. Every heartbeat, every nerve signal, every cell produces small electrical currents. In extreme situations, maybe those tiny sparks could add up to something catastrophic. There's also a more psychological theory that spontaneous combustion might be tied to altered states of consciousness or stress, induced energy discharges. Some victims were reported to have been alone, sedentary, often sitting or sleeping, sometimes under intense emotional strain. Could the body's own energy, normally harmless, misfire under pressure? It borders on paranormal, yet the physics of bioelectric energy are still only partially understood, and that's where the phenomenon sits today, in limbo. Not quite myth, not quite science. Investigators still log the occasional case that looks eerily familiar. A body burned beyond recognition, furniture untouched, no clear source of ignition. They're rare, but they keep happening just enough to remind us the mystery isn't solved. Maybe one day science will uncover the exact chemical chain that triggers these fires. Maybe it'll turn out to be a freak but natural process, something our ancestors witnessed and feared because they didn't have the vocabulary to explain it. Or maybe, and this is the thought that lingers, there's a side to human biology we still don't understand. Something volatile, unpredictable, capable of turning inward in the strangest, deadliest way. Because when a person becomes their own fire, the question isn't just how, it's why now and why them. And until we can answer that, spontaneous human combustion will remain the ultimate forbidden puzzle, the fire that science can't quite extinguish. Morgellons disease. It begins with a feeling, a crawling, itching, burning sensation under the skin. People describe it as if something alive is moving inside them, threading through their flesh. Then come the fibers. Thin, multicolored strands that seem to grow out of the skin itself. They don't dissolve, they don't wipe away, and when doctors examine them, they say it's nothing. That's Morgellons disease, one of the most haunting medical mysteries of our time. A condition so strange that even science can't decide whether it's real or imagined. The first major case came to light in 2001 when a mother named Mary Lightau noticed unusual sores on her young son's skin. She claimed she saw fibers emerging from them, and when she brought him to doctors, they dismissed her concerns as delusion. Frustrated, she began documenting everything: photos, samples, even lab results, and created the Morgellons Research Foundation. The name itself wasn't new. It came from a 17th century report describing a similar illness in French children who grew hairs from their backs. But what Lightau sparked was something else entirely. A modern wave of people all around the world who said, "This is happening to me too." Thousands began sharing eerily similar symptoms: itching, biting sensations, lesions that wouldn't heal, and strange filaments that seemed to appear from within their bodies. Some even reported fatigue, brain fog, and anxiety. At first, it sounded like mass hysteria, but then the fibers began showing up under microscopes. And that's when the real confusion began. Some fibers looked synthetic, like nylon or polyester. Others seemed organic, almost like hair or cellulose. In 2006, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention launched a full investigation. They analyzed patient samples, ran toxicology tests, even studied psychological profiles. 3 years later, the official verdict came out. The fibers were most likely environmental, picked up from clothing or surroundings, and the condition itself was classified as a delusional infestation. But here's the thing: not everyone agreed. Independent researchers found anomalies the CDC report didn't explain. Some fibers appeared to be embedded under unbroken skin, woven into tissue rather than lying on the surface. Electron microscopy showed microscopic structures that didn't match common textiles. Some samples even contained traces of keratin and collagen, materials the human body produces naturally. In other words, there was evidence that these fibers might actually be growing from within. Then came the strangest twist. When biochemists examined certain Morgellons samples under UV light, they fluoresced, glowing blue or green. Ordinary textile fibers don't do that. Some researchers linked these findings to the presence of unusual bacterial DNA, specifically from Agrobacterium, a microorganism known for transferring genetic material between species. That's the same bacterium used in genetic engineering. The idea that it could somehow integrate into human tissue Sounds like science fiction. But it raised a chilling question. What if Morgellons isn't psychological at all, but biological, triggered by something we don't yet understand? Still, the mainstream medical community stands firm. Morgellons, they say, is a psychiatric disorder, a modern echo of an older condition called delusional parasitosis, where patients believe they're infested with bugs or fibers. But even that label feels too simple. These people aren't unstable in the traditional sense. They're often articulate, rational, desperate for answers. Many have been tested repeatedly, medicated, dismissed, yet the physical symptoms persist. So is it possible both sides are right? That Morgellons is partly psychological, but rooted in a physical trigger we haven't identified yet. Some scientists think environmental factors could play a role. Exposure to nanomaterials, industrial fibers, or chemicals that irritate skin and nerves, creating real sensations that spiral into obsession. Others suspect a neurological disorder, a glitch in the brain's sensory pathways that makes the skin's normal signals feel like invasion. In that sense, the fibers could be a coping mechanism, a way the brain gives shape to an invisible threat. It's the mind's attempt to see what it can't understand, but for the people who live with it, that explanation feels cruel. They know what they feel. They see the fibers. They pull them from their skin. They keep samples, photos, diaries. They aren't imagining the pain. And when you listen to their stories, you realize something deeper. Morgellons isn't just a medical puzzle. It's an emotional one. It reveals how fragile the line is between body and mind, between biology and belief. Psychologists point out that the human brain is wired to seek patterns, especially when faced with fear or uncertainty. When something strange happens to your body and no one believes you, that isolation amplifies everything. It's not just pain anymore. It's betrayal, panic, desperation for control. And the more doctors dismiss patients, the more convinced those patients become that something's being hidden. It turns into a cycle that no one knows how to break. Then there's the unsettling possibility that Morgellons might be a cluster of different conditions masquerading as one. Some cases could be neurological, others bacterial, others psychological, all sharing overlapping symptoms. Modern medicine loves clear categories, but Morgellons refuses to fit into one. It's like an illness born from the cracks between science's definitions. Even now, 20 years later, there's no consensus. Some dermatologists still diagnose delusional infestation. Others quietly admit the fibers look too strange to dismiss. Online, entire communities share photos, research, and personal experiments. People trying to heal themselves because they've lost faith in the system. And maybe that's what makes Morgellons so haunting. It's not just the physical horror of fibers growing out of skin. It's what the condition represents. The moment where science hits a wall and the human experience keeps going without it. It forces us to ask whether reality is always measurable, or if sometimes it bleeds into the subjective, into the spaces where the body and mind stop agreeing on what's real. So, what is Morgellons? A misunderstood infection, a psychosomatic response, or proof that our understanding of the human body is still painfully incomplete? No one knows. The evidence points in all directions. But one thing is certain. Whatever it is, it terrifies people not because it kills, but because it makes you question your own senses, to feel something under your skin that no one else believes is there. That's a loneliness no test can measure. And maybe that's the truest mystery of Morgellons. Not just what it is, but what it reveals about us, how fragile certainty really is, and how quickly the mind and body can turn against each other when science runs out of explanations. The Havana Syndrome. It started quietly, a faint buzzing sound, like cicadas or static, drifting through the night air in Havana, Cuba. Then came the pressure, the nausea, the dizziness. Some described it as if an invisible beam were aimed straight at their skull. Within days, several U.S. diplomats and intelligence officers began suffering from migraines, memory loss, vertigo, and a constant ringing in their ears. The symptoms were so bizarre and consistent that investigators had no choice but to give it a name: Havana Syndrome. But what began as an isolated incident in 2016 soon spread around the world, transforming into one of the most chilling modern mysteries in geopolitics. At first, it sounded like paranoia, a handful of embassy staff complaining about strange noises and unexplained health issues didn't exactly scream global crisis. But when doctors examined them, they found real neurological damage, similar to what you might see after a concussion or mild brain trauma. These were healthy, highly trained professionals, suddenly unable to focus, struggling with speech, even losing their balance when they walked. Something had attacked their nervous systems, but there were no wounds, no impact, and no visible source. When the news broke, the theories came flooding in. The leading one: some kind of directed energy weapon. The idea was that a foreign government, possibly Russia, had developed a microwave or sonic device capable of disrupting brain function from a distance. A weapon that could incapacitate without leaving physical traces. It sounded like science fiction, but the more you looked at the data, the harder it was to dismiss. Investigators found that many victims described hearing a high-pitched sound coming from a specific direction, often followed by immediate pain or disorientation. When they moved out of range, the sound stopped. Audio recordings captured at some of the scenes revealed frequencies that didn't match ordinary insects or mechanical sources. One scientist even compared the pattern to what you'd expect from pulsed microwave radiation, something known to affect the nervous system through what's called the Frey effect, a phenomenon first documented by the U.S. military during the Cold War. In that effect, microwaves cause tiny expansions in brain tissue that the ear interprets as clicking or buzzing sounds. No speaker, no external noise. The sound exists only inside your head. Combine that with modern targeting technology, and suddenly the concept of a microwave weapon doesn't sound so far-fetched. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptics argued that the symptoms could be psychological, a mix of stress, anxiety, and the power of suggestion. The diplomats were under intense pressure, working in politically charged environments, and the first cases had received massive media coverage. Could it be mass psychogenic illness? A collective stress response that spread through fear. After all, when people expect danger, the mind can manifest it physically. Still, that explanation doesn't quite fit. MRI scans of some victims revealed measurable changes in brain structure, specifically in white matter, the tissue responsible for communication between different regions of the brain. You can't fake that. These weren't just panic attacks. Something biological had happened. The mystery deepened when new cases began appearing in other countries: China, Germany, Austria, even Washington, D.C. itself. Intelligence officers reported being struck by sudden waves of pressure and confusion in hotel rooms, offices, and even their own homes. One CIA officer in Moscow was hit so severely he collapsed on the street. If this was psychogenic, it was spreading like a virus. Across continents, across agencies, targeting only diplomats and spies. That pattern made it impossible to ignore. Governments began launching classified investigations. Some scientists proposed acoustic weapons using ultrasound, capable of causing tissue damage through resonance. Others suggested a kind of electromagnetic interference, powerful enough to disrupt the brain's electrical signals. The U.S. even assembled a specialized task force to analyze the incidents, pulling experts from the Pentagon, intelligence agencies, and national labs. In 2021, declassified reports confirmed that many victims continued to suffer long-term neurological issues. Their symptoms didn't fade. Their balance and concentration were permanently affected. Some were medically retired, their careers destroyed by something no one could see or name. And then, just as the investigation seemed to be pointing toward directed energy, the story took another turn. A later intelligence review in 2023 concluded that there was no consistent evidence of a foreign attack. No devices found, no signal traces, no smoking gun. According to that report, the most likely explanations were mundane environmental noise, pre-existing medical conditions, or stress reactions. In other words, nothing. Case closed. Except it wasn't, because that conclusion didn't sit right with the people who had lived it. The men and women who could barely stand without dizziness, who remembered the sound, the pain, the sudden collapse. To them, being told it was all in their heads felt like a second injury. Some quietly suggested the truth might have been buried to avoid diplomatic fallout. Admitting that a hostile nation had successfully targeted American personnel on foreign soil with a secret weapon could have meant war. Better, perhaps, to call it unexplained and move on. Meanwhile, classified research into energy-based weapons hasn't stopped. Not in the US, not in Russia, not in China. The technology exists in theory. The only question is whether someone already used it. If Havana Syndrome was an attack, it would mark the beginning of a new kind of warfare. One without bullets or bombs, where the battlefield is your nervous system and the weapon is invisible. If it wasn't, then it reveals something even darker. That the human mind, under enough pressure, can break itself in perfect synchrony with others, creating suffering that looks engineered but isn't. Either explanation is terrifying. Today, the official line remains uncertain. The victims still live with symptoms. Some scientists quietly admit that something physical must have happened. Maybe an unknown kind of radiation. Maybe a form of technology we haven't yet recognized. Others insist the human brain is capable of producing illusions far stranger than we realize. But the truth sits in the same uneasy space where politics and science blur. The place where answers become inconvenient. The kind of mystery that powerful nations would rather leave unsolved. So the question lingers, was Havana Syndrome the world's first invisible weapon attack, or the most elaborate psychosomatic event in modern history? No one knows for sure. All we know is that something happened, something that left scars no one can explain, and fear that still ripples quietly through the corridors of power. Because sometimes, the most dangerous weapon isn't the one we can see. It's the one that leaves no trace, but changes everything. The Devil's Bible's Codex Gigas, they call it the Devil's Bible, a book so massive, so eerie, that even after 800 years, it still defies explanation. The Codex Gigas, Latin for giant book, is the largest medieval manuscript ever found, weighing over 160 pounds and bound in thick leather that creaks like ancient bones when opened. Every inch of it, From the Bible texts to medical guides, exorcism rituals, and even a portrait of the devil himself, was written in perfect handwriting by a single monk. The mystery isn't just what's inside, but how it was made, because according to legend, it was written in one night, with the devil's help. The story begins in a 13th century monastery in Bohemia, what's now the Czech Republic. A monk, whose name history has lost, committed a sin so terrible that the other brothers sentenced him to a living death, to be walled up alive inside the monastery as punishment. In desperation, he begged for one chance to redeem himself. He promised to create a book that would glorify the monastery and contain all the world's knowledge: the Bible, history, medicine, and sacred texts, and that he would do it in a single night. The other monks laughed, but agreed. And so, as the story goes, when midnight came and the monk realized the task was impossible, he made a terrible pact. He prayed not to God, but to the devil, offering his soul in exchange for supernatural help. By morning, the book was complete, and as proof of the bargain, he painted a massive, chilling portrait of the devil across one of the pages. A towering demon with green eyes, red horns, and clawed hands, sitting between two towers, as if watching over his own work. That's the legend, but what about the science? The Codex Gigas is real. It exists, preserved today in the National Library of Sweden, and the deeper scholars study it, the stranger it becomes. The entire book, all 620 pages, is written in the same flawless script. No corrections, no hesitation marks, no changes in style. Experts estimate that a single person really did write it all. But here's the catch: it would have taken them at least 20 years of non-stop writing to finish. Some even say 30. The handwriting is so consistent that it looks like it was done in one sitting. But physically, that's impossible. Then there's the content. The Codex Gigas contains the complete Latin Bible, but also medical recipes, spells, and texts on astronomy and exorcism. It's as if someone tried to capture the entire medieval universe, faith, science, and the supernatural, in one single book. Even the parchment is unsettling. To make a manuscript of that size, scribes would have needed the hides of nearly 200 donkeys. 200 animals sacrificed to produce a book that no one person could ever lift alone. And yet, despite its size and weight, it feels intentional, not chaotic, not patched together. Every word, every image was planned. Even the devil's portrait appears exactly in the middle of the manuscript, facing a page filled with a hymn of praise to God. Some scholars think that's no coincidence. It's like the monk was trying to show the eternal tension between good and evil, side by side, bound together forever. So what about that idea that it was written in one night? Clearly, that's impossible. But maybe the legend hides a deeper truth. Maybe it wasn't about speed, but about possession. The idea that a human could produce something beyond human capacity. Monks at the time believed that writing was a divine act, a form of prayer. But what if, in this case, something else took control? There's something unnerving about the book's energy. Visitors say standing before it feels heavy. Not just physically, but emotionally. Some claim the air around it feels colder. Others say they feel watched, as if the devil's eyes on the page are following them. Rationally, that's just suggestion, but history doesn't help. The Codex Gigas has always been associated with disaster. Every place it's been housed has suffered tragedy, plagues, fires, invasions. When it was taken as war booty by Swedish troops in 1648, the monastery that lost it never recovered. And yet, no one can deny its beauty. The artistry is breathtaking, brilliant golds and deep reds, ornate lettering, margins that look almost machine perfect. Whoever wrote it wasn't just a monk, they were a genius. Some scholars have proposed that the author might have been a recluse, someone with obsessive discipline, driven by guilt or faith so intense it bordered on madness. Others wonder if the monk really was confined, spending decades in solitude, pouring everything he knew into one impossible creation, a literal lifetime of devotion written in ink. There's also a psychological angle. In the Middle Ages, isolation and religious obsession often produced visionary states, what we might now call psychosis. People genuinely believed they were being guided by divine or demonic forces, so perhaps the monk felt possessed, and in that state he wrote with superhuman focus, channeling something far beyond ordinary consciousness. Even today, digital analysis can't fully explain the uniformity of the handwriting. The ink never fades or changes tone, even though it must have been made from different batches. There are no visible breaks between sessions. It's like the monk sat down, started writing, and never stopped. And then there's that devilish image, still as vivid as the day it was painted. No other medieval Bible includes such a portrait. Some historians think it was a warning, a reminder of temptation. Others believe it was the monk's confession, a visual signature of the entity that helped him complete the impossible. Whether the Devil's Bible is a cursed object or just the product of an extraordinary human mind, it sits at the edge of what we think is possible. A single person creating a work that vast and perfect, without rest, without error, and without aid. That alone borders on the supernatural. So maybe the truth lies somewhere between faith and legend. Maybe the monk wasn't writing with the devil. Maybe he was writing against him, racing against damnation itself to fill the pages before his fate was sealed. Because the strangest thing about the Codex Gigas isn't that it might have been written in one night. It's that, after 8 centuries, we still can't prove it wasn't.